Tonight, we're exploring the curse of Harrenhal, the castle that destroyed every house. This is one of those topics with more beneath the surface, but I'll keep the tone calm so you can relax into the story. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. In the heart of the Riverlands, where the waters of the God's Eye lap against the shore in a rhythmic, ancient pulse, there stands a monument to human vanity that has outlived every soul who ever tried to claim it. It is a fortress of twisted stone and melted rock, a jagged scar on the horizon that can be seen for leagues in every direction. They call it Harrenhal. To some, it is merely a ruin, a relic of a forgotten age when kings of iron and salt ruled the green lands. To others, it is a living entity, a hungry beast made of masonry and mortar that devours the lineages of those brave or foolish enough to call themselves its master. It is the largest castle ever built in the history of Westeros, and yet it is the most lonely place in the Seven Kingdoms. Imagine standing at the base of the 5 great towers. They rise up like the fingers of a skeletal hand, reaching for a sky that once rained fire upon them. These towers are so vast that they seem to dwarf the very mountains of the moon. Kingspire, the Widow's Tower, the Wailing Tower, the Tower of Dread, and the Tower of Ghosts. Each name carries a weight, a history of sorrow that has seeped into the very porous stone. When the wind blows from the north, it whistles through the cracks and the melted crenellations, creating a low, moaning sound that the locals say is the voice of Harren the Black himself, still screaming from the day the sky turned to flame. The story of Harrenhal is not just a story of architecture, it is a story of blood. It is said that when Harrenhal, the last king of the Isles and the Rivers, commissioned this gargantuan project, he was not satisfied with mere stone and lime. The legends whisper that he mixed the blood of his captives, the thousands of rivermen who died in the pits and on the scaffolds, into the very mortar that holds the castle together. He wanted a fortress that would last 10,000 years, a place where no army could ever hope to breach the gates. For 40 years, 3 generations of laborers toiled under the lash, dragging massive blocks of black stone from distant quarries to the northern shore of the God's Eye. They died by the hundreds, their bodies broken by the sheer scale of Harren's ambition, and as the final stone was laid, as the last drop of blood dried in the sun, Harren looked upon his work and declared it impenetrable. He believed he had cheated fate. He believed he had built a throne that would endure until the end of time. But the gods, or perhaps the land itself, have a way of punishing such arrogance. On the very day that Harren the Black celebrated the completion of his masterpiece, a new power landed on the shores of the Blackwater. Aegon Targaryen had arrived with his sisters and his dragons, and the world of the petty kings was about to be burned away. Harren thought his walls were too thick for any ram, his gates too strong for any fire. He did not account for the fact that dragons do not need to knock on doors. When the black dread descended from the clouds, the castle did not crumble, it melted. The stone turned to liquid, the air became a furnace, and Harren and his entire line were roasted alive within the very walls they thought would protect them. Since that day, the castle has passed from hand to hand like a poisoned chalice. House Hoare was only the first to fall. In the 3 centuries that followed, House Harroway, House Towers, House Qoherys, and House Strong would all attempt to tame the beast of the Riverlands, and one by one, they all met ends that were as swift as they were mysterious. Some died in fires, others fell to madness, and many simply saw their lines wither away until there was no one left to inherit the blackened halls. It is as if the castle itself rejects the notion of ownership, as if it demands a price in souls that no noble house can afford to pay. In the era of the House of the Dragon, this curse, in its most insidious form, House Strong, a family of ancient blood and great physical prowess, holding the seat of Harrenhal. They are the advisors to kings, the hands that guide the realm, and yet the shadow of the 5 towers looms over them. Lionel Strong and his son Harwin, men of strength and honor, consumed by a fire that felt all too familiar to those who know the history of the Kingspire Tower. Was it a simple accident? Was it the political maneuvering of Larys Strong, the Clubfoot who walks the halls like a ghost? Or was it the castle itself, reclaiming its tribute? The mystery of Harrenhal is woven into the very fabric of the Dance of the Dragons. It is a strategic prize of immeasurable value, a fortress that can house thousands of soldiers and provide a base of operations for whoever controls the Riverlands. But it is also a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead seems dangerously thin. There are stories of Alys Rivers, the Witch Queen of Harrenhal, who is said to see the future in the reflections of the God's Eye, and who spoke to the dragons as if they were kin. There are whispers of the old gods watching from the Isle of Faces, their eyes carved into the white bark of weirwood trees, witnessing the folly of men who build monuments to their own pride. As we journey through the history of this cursed place, we must ask ourselves what it truly means to hold Harrenhal. Is the curse a literal magical hex, born from the blood in the mortar and the dragon flame in the sky? Or is it a psychological weight, a manifestation of the fact that no one can ever truly feel safe in a place built on such suffering? To rule Harrenhal is to live in the shadow of giants, to walk through halls where the echoes of the dead are louder than the voices of the living. It is to know that you are merely a tenant in a house that intends to outlive you. Tonight, we will peel back the layers of ash and legend. We will look at the rise and fall of each house that tried to claim the lordship. We will examine the strategic importance of the castle in the wars that shaped Westeros, and we will delve into the dark folklore that keeps the common folk away from its walls after sunset. We will look at the tragic end of the Strongs, the madness of Danelle Lothston, and the eerie silence that greeted Arya Stark when she walked those same halls 200 years later. The stones of Harrenhal have seen everything. They have seen the birth of kings and the extinction of entire families. They have seen the fires of the conquest and the cold betrayals of the royal court. And through it all, the castle remains. It does not grow old. It only grows more haunted. It sits by the water, reflecting the moonlight on its melted surfaces, waiting for the next lord to arrive, the next house to rise, and the next tragedy to unfold. It is a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, even the greatest fortress is no shield against the turning of the wheel. So, let us settle in. Let the sounds of the modern world fade away as we transport ourselves to the muddy banks of the God's Eye. Let the cool air of the Riverlands fill the room as we look up at those 5 blackened towers. We are going deep into the lore of the castle that devours, the fortress of Harren the Black, and the enduring mystery of the curse that has never been broken. This is the story of Harrenhal, the most beautiful and terrible ruin in all of the 7 kingdoms. It is a story of how power can become a prison, and how the things we build to make ourselves immortal are often the very things that lead to our destruction. We will look at the geography, the strategic positioning that makes Harrenhal the heart of the realm, and the spiritual significance of the God's Eye, the largest lake in the continent, and a place of immense mystical power. We will explore why Aegon the Conqueror chose to make an example of this place, and how that single act of violence set the tone for 300 years of misfortune. We will meet the figures who defined its history, from the brutal Maegor the Cruel to the enigmatic Larys Strong, and we will try to understand why, despite the clear evidence of a curse, men and women still fight to the death to call it their own. There is a specific kind of silence that exists within the walls of Harrenhal. It is not the peaceful silence of a forest or the quiet of a library. It is a heavy, expectant silence, like the breath held before a scream. It is the silence of a place that is full of memories it would rather forget. As we move through the chapters of this history, keep that silence in mind. Think of the thousands of souls whose lives were traded for these stones. Think of the heat that was so intense it turned solid rock into something that flowed like honey. And think of the houses that thought they were different, that thought they could be the ones to finally break the cycle. The curse of Harrenhal is not just a ghost story told to frighten children. It is a historical fact, written in the blood of the whores, the Harroways, the Towers, the Qoherys, and the Strongs. It is a pattern that repeats with terrifying consistency. And as we look toward the future of the story, toward the great battles and the fires yet to come, we realize that the castle is not just a setting, it is a character in its own right, a silent observer that has seen the beginning and will likely see the end of the Targaryen dynasty. So, prepare yourself for a journey through time and shadow, We will leave no stone unturned, even the ones that still weep with the moisture of the lake. We will find the truth behind the myths and the reality behind the hauntings. The fire is lit, the map is laid out, and the history of Westeros is waiting to be told. Let us begin our descent into the dark heart of the Riverlands, into the legend of the castle that destroyed every house. The 5 towers of Harrenhal still rise above the God's Eye Lake, but they are no longer the proud spires Harren the Black intended. They are melted. They sag like molten candles, frozen in the moment of their destruction. To any traveller passing through the Riverlands, that sight is a warning carved into stone and slag. It says, "This is what happens to those who reach too high. This is the Monument of Hubris." You have to understand what Harren the Black was trying to prove. For 40 years he forced the Rivermen to build. Not just build, to bleed. The old stories say he mixed blood into the mortar, believing that the castle would last forever if it was cemented with the suffering of his enemies. 3 generations of slaves died in those walls. And when the last stone was finally laid, Harren stood in his great hall and declared Harrenhal impenetrable. He named it after himself, a monument to his own power, a name that would echo through the ages. But the very day the castle was finished, Aegon Targaryen landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. And the world changed. Aegon offered Harren a choice: bend the knee or burn. Harren laughed. He looked at his walls, thicker than any in Westeros, and he pointed to his towers and said, "Your dragon cannot melt stone." He was wrong. Balerion the Black Dread had been alive since before the doom of Valyria. That dragon had seen empires fall. Stone was nothing. Fire so hot it turns rock to liquid is not a weapon you can hide from. Balerion descended on Harrenhal, and the heat was so intense that the 5 grand towers melted like tallow. They did not crumble, they melted. Harren and his sons burned alive in the tallest tower, the tower that would forever after be called Kingspire. That was the beginning of the curse. But a curse is not just a ghost story, it is a pattern, a repeating rhythm of death that clings to the castle like smoke. Because Harrenhal is not a fortress. It is a graveyard for the overreaching ambition of kings, and it devours every house that tries to claim it. Think about the list. After Harren's line was extinguished, Aegon the Conqueror gave the castle to a loyal follower, House Harroway. Within a few years, that house was gone. Then House Towers held it, gone. Then House Qoherys, gone. Each time, the lords died in ways that felt almost deliberate. Fires, plagues, executions. And each time, the castle passed to another family who thought they would be different. They never were. The place earned its nickname, the castle that devours. It is not a metaphor. It is a description of what happens when you sit on that seat. You rise, you hold power for a brief moment, and then you are consumed. The 5 melted towers still stand as a warning to all of Westeros. Ambition unchecked leads to ruin, and Harrenhal ensures that ruin is spectacular. This is the central truth of the castle. It is not haunted by ghosts in the traditional sense. It is haunted by the idea of its own creation, the arrogance of a man who believed he could build something that even the gods could not touch. And that idea, that pride, is a trap. Every lord who takes Harrenhal imagines they can master it, that they can be the exception. They never are. The strong family learned that lesson in fire, but their story is tied to something deeper, something that reaches back to the very moment Harren the Black finished his castle. There is a vision behind this place, a vision that belonged to the Iron King, the man who built his own tomb and called it a throne. And that vision is what we will trace next, the twisted dream that turned a king into ash and a castle into a curse. Those 5 towers still stand today, blackened and twisted, like the fingers of a buried god clawing up through the earth. They are the first thing you see from miles away, a warning etched into the sky above the god's eye. But the warning is not about dragons, not really. The warning is about the man who raised them, and the hunger that drove him. Harrenhal was not content to be king of the Iron Islands. He wanted more than the salt and stone of his forefathers. He wanted the rich soil of the Riverlands, and he took it with iron and fire. But even that was not enough. Power, for Harren, was not a thing you held. It was a sickness you fed. and the only food that could satisfy him was the impossible. He looked at the great fortresses of Westeros, the Eyrie perched on its mountain, Storm's End with its curtain wall of magic and granite, and he felt a cold, gnawing jealousy. They were the work of ancient kings, built to last. But Harren wanted more than to last. He wanted to be remembered forever. He wanted a name that would never die, a monument so vast and so terrible that even the gods would have to stop and stare. That is the psychological engine behind Harrenhal. Not strategy, not defense, immortality, the desperate, obsessive need to carve yourself into the world so deeply that time itself cannot erase you. Harren was not building a castle, he was building a gravestone for every king who came before him, and a pedestal for his own legend. He chose the northern shore of the God's Eye for reasons that were both strategic and spiritual. The lake is the largest body of water in the south, a mirror that reflects the sky and the heart of the riverlands. From its shores, Harren could command the rivers and roads that tied the realm together. No army could approach unseen. No messenger could slip past. It was the perfect seat for a king who wanted to watch his every subject. But there was something else in that choice. The God's Eye is sacred ground. It holds the Isle of Faces, where the pact between the first men and the children of the forest was sealed. The trees there are carved with faces that watch. Harren chose that spot not because he respected the old gods, but because he wanted to dominate them. He wanted to sit on the shore of a holy lake and make his own divinity. The castle would be his mountain, his throne, his proof that he was above the ancient spirits that still haunted the waters. And so the work began. 40 years of agony. 40 years of slaves breaking their backs in the mud, of rivermen weeping as their families were dragged to the quarry. Harren did not care. He had a vision, and that vision demanded blood. It is said he mixed human blood into the mortar, not for strength. Stone does not become stronger from blood, but for meaning. He wanted the castle to be born from suffering, so that every brick would remember the price he was willing to pay. But the irony is this: the more Harren tried to cheat death, the more he built his own tomb. Every tower he raised was a promise to the stranger. Every shout of triumph echoed back as a curse. The castle that was meant to make him immortal became the vessel of his destruction. And on the very day the last stone was laid, when Harren stood in the great hall and declared his fortress impenetrable, the shadow of a dragon fell across the lake. That is the moment the curse truly began. Not with the fire, but with the arrogance. Harren believed his monument could withstand anything, even a god. But he forgot that the gods do not enjoy being challenged. They answer in their own time, with their own fire. We will see that fire soon enough, in 40 years of agony. But for now, stand with Harren on the shore of the God's Eye. Hear the wind whistling through unfinished towers. Smell the fresh mortar and the old blood. He is smiling. He thinks he has won. He has no idea what is coming. 40 years. That is the span of time it took to raise Harrenhal from the mud of the God's Eye. Not a single reign, not a single lifetime. 3 generations of men were born, lived their entire lives, and died under the shadow of an unfinished dream. Harren the Black began as a young king, with a vision of stone and iron. But by the time the last block was laid, he was an old, bitter tyrant. His sons had grown grey in the service of a monument they would only see completed when they themselves were near the grave. The castle was not built by the hands of its master. It was carved out of the living flesh of the riverlands by a workforce that had no choice. Thousands of rivermen and ironborn slaves were driven to the shores of the God's Eye like cattle. Men who had once farmed the rich soil of the Trident, who had raised children and prayed to the old gods, were torn from their homes and chained to the stone. Ironborn reavers, captured in raids and deemed expendable, joined them. They worked from sunrise until their fingers bled, dragging granite blocks that weighed as much as a man, mixing mortar that seemed to drink their sweat. The whip was the only language Harren's overseers spoke, and the river of the God's Eye ran red with the blood of those who collapsed under the load. It is said that Harren ordered the bodies of the dead thrown into the foundations, a grim offering to ensure the walls would stand forever. The environmental toll was staggering. The entire Riverlands was stripped bare of its finest stone and oldest timber. Quarries that had supplied generations of builders were hollowed out until they became gaping wounds in the earth. Forests that had stood since the age of heroes were felled, their oaks and pines used for scaffolding and siege engines. The land around Harrenhal became a barren, pockmarked scar, a wasteland of mud and dust where nothing would grow again for decades. Rivers were diverted to cool the forge fires that blazed day and night, and the air itself grew thick with ash. The river Trident ran grey with silt for miles downstream. It was as if Harren was not just building a castle, but draining the life from the entire region to feed his own vanity. This was not a construction project. It was a slow, grinding agony. Generation after generation of slaves watched their fathers die on the scaffolding, then took up the hammer themselves. They raised children who were born into the chains of the unfinished fortress. Those children knew nothing but the smell of wet stone and the sound of the overseer's whistle. They grew old in the same quarry pits their grandfathers had carved. And when the final tower was capped, when Harren stood atop the tallest spire and declared his impenetrable palace complete, the slaves who had built it were given no reward. Many were slaughtered outright, their bodies buried in the rubble, to ensure the secret of the castle's weaknesses would never be spoken. But the cost was not just measured in lives. It was measured in the silent scream of a land that had been raped of its resources. The riverlands never fully recovered. The great forests did not regrow. The quarries were never reopened. The scars on the earth became a permanent reminder of Harren's madness, a curse written into the soil long before the first dragon ever flew over the towers. And yet, there is a darker rumor that lingers even now, a whisper that the mortar of Harrenhal was not mixed with water alone. They say Harren commanded that the blood of his slaves be stirred into the lime, a binding agent of cruelty so foul that the castle would forever be soaked in suffering. That is a story that deserves its own telling, of what truly lies between those melting stones, and why the curse of Harrenhal may have been built into the very walls from the very first brick. As the forced labor of thousands dragged on through those 40 agonizing years, a darker rumor began to seep through the ranks of the rivermen and ironborn slaves, a whisper that carried more weight than the stones they hauled. It was said that King Harren the Black was not satisfied with mere mortal effort. He wanted something deeper, something bound in blood, to make his fortress truly eternal. The construction had already claimed countless lives. Men died from exhaustion, from the lash, from the cold winters that swept across the God's Eye. But there were whispers among the overseers, stories that the slaves told each other in hushed tones around dying fires. They said that Harren had ordered the blood of his workers to be mixed directly into the mortar, not just a symbolic gesture, but an ancient, grim practice. The belief that human sacrifice would seal the walls with a supernatural strength, that the essence of the builders would become part of the stone itself. We can't confirm these tales with certainty. The maesters of the citadel dismissed them as folk superstition, the fanciful nightmares of a terrified people. But when you look at Harrenhal's black, twisted towers, when you feel the weight of its history, the idea becomes disturbingly plausible. There's a reason the castle earned the name the Fortress of Blood, long before Aegon's dragons ever touched its walls. Imagine the scene: thousands of rivermen, hollow-eyed and broken from decades of labor, forced to carry buckets of red-tinted slurry to the masons. The iron smell of fresh blood mixing with the sharp dust of crushed stone. Harren himself would sometimes ride through the construction site, his black armor glinting under the grey sky, watching as his dream rose from the shores of the God's Eye. He was not a man who shrank from cruelty. He was the king of the Iron Islands, and he would leave a monument that would endure for 1,000 years, even if every brick was soaked in the suffering of his enemies. This is not just a ghost story. It's the foundation of the castle's dark karma, baked into its very walls before the last stone was ever laid. The curse of Harrenhal did not begin with the dragonfire that melted its towers. It began here, in the mortar pits, where the line between labor and sacrifice blurred into something unspeakable. The castle was born in sin, and sin leaves a stain that no fire can cleanse, not even dragonfire. Some historians point to the fact that the mortar used in ancient fortresses often included organic binders, sometimes animal blood or even urine, to improve workability. But at Harrenhal, the scale and the inhumanity of the project turned a practical technique into a legend of horror. The rivermen believed, and perhaps rightly, that the castle was feeding on them, drinking their life force to grow stronger. And in a way, it was. Every stone that was set, every tower that climbed toward the sky, was cemented by the sweat and blood of the conquered. The castle was a living monument to Harren's arrogance, but it was also a tomb for the thousands who died to build it. And so, as the 40th year approached, the workers began to speak of a different kind of harvest. They said the castle itself was hungry, that it would never be satisfied until it had consumed every one of its builders. They told stories of men who vanished overnight, their bodies never found, their blood added to the mortar of a new wall. The overseers did nothing to stop the rumours. In fact, they encouraged them. Fear was a cheaper tool than iron. But all of this, the blood, the sacrifice, the 40 years of agony, was building toward a single moment. The day the last stone was laid, the day Harren stood atop his tallest tower and declared his fortress impenetrable. That day the gods would answer, not with a whisper, but with wings of fire. And the very walls that had been built with such malice would become the pyre for the man who conjured them from the earth. The last brick had been set, the final stone laid. After 40 years of agony, Harrenhal stood complete, the largest fortress ever raised in Westeros, its 5 colossal towers clawing at the sky, like the fingers of a god who had finally answered a mad king's prayer. For 3 generations, the rivers of the Riverlands had run red with the blood of slaves, and the mortar that bound those black stones together was whispered to be mixed with something gandar than lime and water. And now, on this day of supposed triumph, Harren the Black stood atop the tallest tower, gazing out over the god's eye as if he had conquered the world itself. But the gods have a cruel sense of timing, for on that very day, as Harren's masons laid down their tools and his slaves wept with exhausted relief, a different kind of storm was making landfall. Aegon Targaryen, the Dragonlord from Valyria's last ember, set foot on the shores of Westeros at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. With him came his 2 sisters and their 3 dragons, creatures of living fire that had never been seen in these lands. The conquest had begun, and it was aimed directly at the heart of the Iron King's dominion. Harren the Black, in his arrogance, made a boast that would echo through history like the tolling of a funeral bell. He looked upon his completed walls, the stonework so thick that no ram could dent it, the towers so high that no ladder could reach them. And he declared that Harrenhal could withstand any army, that no siege engine, no host, no force in the 7 kingdoms could breach its defences. He said it with the certainty of a man who believed he had built a monument to his own immortality. But he had forgotten that dragons are not armies. The news reached Harrenhal quickly. A rider came from the south, breathless and pale, reporting that a Targaryen host had landed, that 3 winged beasts were burning everything in their path. Harren listened, and he laughed. He laughed at the idea that some foreign dragon could threaten what he had spent 40 years building. He ordered the gates barred, the garrison doubled, and sent word to Aegon that the Iron King would not bend. And so it was that the 2 kings met face to face, not on a battlefield, but at the gates of Harrenhal. The parley between Aegon the Conqueror and Harren the Black remains one of the most fateful conversations in Westerosi history. Aegon rode up on his great black dragon, Balerion, whose wings cast a shadow that swallowed the entire courtyard. He did not dismount. He simply looked down at Harren from his saddle and offered him a choice. Surrender, and he would be allowed to keep his lands and his life. Refuse, and he would burn. Harren, standing at the threshold of his masterpiece, sneered. He pointed to his towers, to the walls that had cost him everything, and he said, "Build me a wall of stone that can withstand fire, and I will yield." He believed that Aegon's dragon was just a beast, that fire could not melt granite, that his fortress was proof against any weapon the world could throw at it. Aegon gave him one last chance. He reminded Harren that the sun was setting, and that when it rose again, he would have his answer. Then he turned Balerion and flew away, leaving the Iron King alone with his pride. That night, Harren feasted in his great hall, surrounded by his sons, his captains, his household. He drank to his own glory, to the curse that would never touch him, to the immortality he thought he had bought with blood and stone. But in the darkness above the god's eye, Balerion was waiting, and when the sun rose, the gods answered. Aegon the Conqueror stood at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, and he heard the news from the Riverlands. Harren the Black had refused the offer, the only offer Aegon would ever extend. The King of the Ironborn had laughed from behind his gargantuan walls, certain that no army could breach them, certain that his immortality was sealed in stone. And in that moment, Aegon made a decision that would echo through history. A decision that had nothing to do with armies at all. He would not waste a single soldier trying to batter down Harren's gates. He would not lay siege for months or years. He would simply take to the sky. Balerion the Black Dread spread his wings over the god's eye, and the shadow that fell across the lake was darker than any storm. Harrenhal had been built to withstand every conventional weapon of warfare. The battering ram, the trebuchet, the siege tower, the hungry flame of a simple fire arrow. But no one had ever built a fortress to withstand a dragon the size of a mountain. No one had ever considered what happens when living fire meets stone that was never meant to melt. The physics of dragon fire had always been a mystery, even to the maesters who studied it. Balerion's flame was not a normal combustion. It burned at temperatures beyond what any forge could achieve. When that torrent of white-hot destruction struck the outer walls of Harrenhal, the granite did not crack or crumble. It did what rock does when it faces temperatures that rival the heart of a volcano. It softened. It turned viscous. It began to flow like honey, and then like water, and then like nothing that had ever been seen in Westeros before. Harren the Black watched from the tallest tower, the one he had named for himself, as the stonework that had taken 40 years to raise began to run down the sides of his masterpiece. He had boasted that the walls were impenetrable, but he had not accounted for the simplest truth of all. Any enclosure, no matter how thick, can become a trap if the fire comes from above. The castle transformed from a fortress into a giant oven in a matter of moments. The air inside the curtain walls grew heavy with superheated ash. The stones radiated heat like a kiln. The men who had crowded into the yard expecting to laugh at the dragon found themselves suffocating in a shroud of molten rock and searing wind. Balerion circled low, and with each pass, the towers sagged like candles left too long in the sun. The 5 great spires that Harren had built to scrape the sky began to droop and slump. One by one, they collapsed into blackened, twisted shapes, still standing, but forever deformed. The stone had been forever changed, a permanent monument to the moment ambition met the sky. Inside the King's Pyre, Harren and his sons cooked in their own armour. The castle that was supposed to outlast them all became their funeral pyre, and when Balerion finally landed, the dragon's claws sizzled against the still glowing stone. The Black Dread had done what no host of men could do. He had erased the boast of a tyrant in a single afternoon, but the fire did not end there. The curse of Harrenhal was born in that inferno. The heat had been so intense that it permeated the very foundation, baking the blood that the slaves had mixed into the mortar into a permanent seal of death. From that day forward, the castle would never be free of the echo of that burning. The stone walls would weep with condensation in winter, and the air would always smell faintly of ash. Even after a century of rain, Aegon had made his point. But the point itself was a terrible one. The Conqueror had proven that no fortress, no matter how mighty, could withstand a dragon, and in doing so, he had set the stage for the long, dark legacy that would follow, not just for the castle, but for every house that ever tried to claim it. The 5 towers were melted, but they were not gone. They stood as a warning, a silent accusation against anyone who thought they could master the castle that devours. That warning would be ignored many times over. The next family to take possession, the Harroways, would learn the lesson soon enough. But before they did, we must understand exactly what happened in those moments when the stone ran like water and why the towers never cooled again. The story of the melting of the 5 towers is not just a tale of dragonfire. It is the story of how a curse is forged, 1 degree at a time. Aegon the Conqueror had seen enough. From the back of Balerion, he watched the black stone of Harrenhal rise like a clenched fist against the sky. And he understood something that Harren the Black never could. Walls are not merely stone and mortar. They are a statement of fear. And the tallest walls in the world are built by those who are terrified of what lies beyond them. Harren's defiance that morning was not courage. It was the last gasp of a man who had spent 40 years building his own tomb. The black dread circled once, twice, and then the shadow of his wings swept across the god's eye, like a storm coming to the lake. Aegon gave no warning. He simply pressed his heels into the dragon's scaled hide, and Balerion understood. The beast opened his mouth, and the fire that came forth was not like any flame a forge has ever known. It was the breath of a god, hot enough to turn sand into glass, hot enough to make the very air scream, and it struck the king's pyre first. That tower, the tallest of the 5, had been Harren's crowning achievement. From its summit, he could see the entire Riverlands, the glittering waters of the lake, the smoke of 1,000 slave fires. He had stood there just days before, laughing at the news of Aegon's landing. "Let him come," he had said. "Let him bring his dragons. My walls are thicker than any beast's breath." But he had never seen what Balerion could do. No one had. The fire licked at the base of the king's pyre, and for a moment the stone held. Granite, salt, and the blood of thousands mixed into mortar that had been cured for a generation. It was the strongest castle ever built. But dragonfire is not heat. It is a transformation. The stone began to glow. Not red, not orange, but a pale, eerie white, the colour of a star dying. Then it softened. It dripped. The walls did not crack or collapse. They melted like wax, running down the tower in thick black rivulets that hardened into twisted, jagged shapes as they cooled. The king's pyre was the first to fall, and with it, the dream of Harren the Black. Inside that tower, Harren and all his sons, every male heir of House Hoare, were trapped. The stones around them sagged inward, the floors above them became rivers of slag, and the heat itself became a weapon. They suffocated before they burned. The air turned to poison by the sulphur and vaporized rock. Some say they screamed, but no one heard. The roar of Balerion's fire drowned out every sound but the grinding of molten stone. One by one, the other 4 spires followed. The Tower of the Widow, the Tower of Ghosts, the Tower of Dread, and the last, which would later be known simply as the Wailing Tower. Each one suffered the same fate. Balerion did not need to ram the walls. He did not need to land. He simply flew in slow circles, patient, methodical, while his flame scoured every tower from its foundation to its highest parapet. The castle that had taken 40 years to build was unmade in a single night. By dawn, the fires had cooled. What remained was not a fortress. It was a skeleton. The towers stood, but they were blackened, twisted, their surfaces smooth as glass in some places, rough and cracked in others. The stone had been pulled into grotesque shapes, like bones unearthed from a pyre. The curtain walls were still intact in large sections, but they were no longer straight. They bowed and bulged, as if the castle itself had tried to escape the heat. And Harren the Black was gone. His body was never found, never identified. The only evidence of his passing was the lingering smell of burned flesh that clung to the stones for weeks. The entire male line of House Hoare, every son, every nephew, every cousin, had been inside the King's Pyre when it melted. The house that had ruled the Iron Islands and the Riverlands for 3 centuries was extinguished in a single night, leaving nothing but ash and a twisted monument to arrogance. It was then that the curse was born, not from a spell or a god's decree, but from the very substance of the castle. As the fires cooled and the black slag hardened, the legends began to take root. The rivermen, who had been forced to build Harrenhal, whispered that the blood they had mixed into the mortar had been baked into the stone, that the souls of the dead were now trapped forever in the blackened walls. They said the castle was angry, that it remembered the torment of its creation. and that it would never allow another lord to rule over it without suffering the same fate. Aegon claimed the castle for the Iron Throne, but he never lived in it. He granted it instead to a loyal knight, a man named Qoherys, who was foolish enough to accept. The seeds of the first victim were planted the moment the last rivulet of slag hardened into a grotesque curtain. Because Harrenhal was never meant to be a home, it was meant to be a warning, and the warning was written in fire, in blood, and in the twisted, blackened towers that still stand today, forever scarred by the Black Dread's breath. That story, the fate of House Qoherys, is one of the earliest and most forgotten tragedies in the long tale of the castle's curse, and it begins not with a dragon, but with a lord who thought he could tame a ruin. The smoke from the king's pyre had barely cleared when Aegon the Conqueror faced his first real decision about the castle that would become a graveyard of ambitions. The year was one of conquest, the Iron Islands broken, the Riverlands cowed. But what do you do with a fortress so vast that it could house an entire army, yet so charred and twisted that its melted stone still glowed red at night? Aegon knew he could not simply leave it empty. That would invite rebellion, a dark beacon for any lord who dreamed of restoring the old order. So he looked to his most trusted sword, the man who had stood beside him through every battle, every negotiation, every moment of uncertainty. That man was Quentyn Qoherys, his master of arms, a veteran of 100 skirmishes, a man whose loyalty had been forged in the same fires that now consumed Harrenhal. Aegon's decision was not made lightly. He understood symbolism, and he understood power. To grant a king's seat to a simple knight was a statement. The old world was dead, and the new world would be built on service, not bloodlines. Quentyn Qoherys had never asked for a castle. He had never coveted the grandeur of the Iron Islands throne. But when Aegon placed the blackened keys of Harrenhal into his hands, Quentyn accepted with the stoic silence of a man who knew his duty. He would be the first lord of the new era, the one tasked with taming the beast that Harren had left behind. The ruin was at first a symbol of Aegon's mercy and his ruthlessness. Quentyn Qoherys began the slow work of clearing the ash, patching the walls, and trying to make the castle habitable. But there was something in the air at Harrenhal, a weight that pressed down on anyone who spent too long within its shadow. The servants whispered that the stones were still crying. The masons claimed they saw figures moving in the melted windows. And Quentyn himself, a man who had faced death on 100 battlefields, began to look over his shoulder. He died quietly, peacefully in his bed, which should have been a blessing. But his death, coming just a few years after taking possession, marked the first of 1,000 premature exits. His son, the second Lord Qoherys, inherited the castle. He was a young man, full of fire and ambition, determined to prove that the curse was nothing but superstition. He threw feasts, held tournaments, invited the great houses of the Riverlands to witness the rebirth of Harrenhal. But within a year he was dead. A hunting accident, they said. A fall from his horse that broke his neck. His wife followed soon after, consumed by a fever no maester could name. And then the children. First the youngest, then the eldest, one after another, until the family tree that had seemed so strong withered to a single sickly branch. Within 2 generations, House Qoherys was gone, its name erased from the rolls of the great houses, its lords buried beneath the very stones they had tried to reclaim. This was not coincidence. This was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself for centuries. Every lord who claimed the title of Harrenhal, every house that dared to raise its banner over those 5 twisted towers, would meet the stranger in a way that felt deliberate. The stranger did not come as a plague or a war. He came as a whisper in the night, a door that locked from the inside, a sudden silence where there should have been laughter. The Qoherys were the first true victims, the proof that Harren's blood had soaked into the mortar deeper than anyone could wash away. They were the warning that no amount of loyalty, no amount of service to the dragon could protect a man from the ambition that Aegon himself had placed in their hands. And so Harrenhal stood empty again, a monument to futility, waiting for the next fool to claim it. The next family to walk those halls would be the Harroways, and their story would be even more terrible, more sudden, and far more bloody. The massacre of House Harroway would prove that the curse was not just a legend. It was a law of the land, written in fire and silence. The extinction of House Qoherys was a warning, but it was a quiet one, a whisper lost in the ashes of a single generation. After Quentyn Qoherys and his line vanished, without a cry, the great ruin of Harrenhal sat empty again, its blackened towers staring out over the god's eye like the sockets of a skull. The crown needed someone to hold the castle, to restore it to some semblance of order. And so the honour passed to a new name, a fresh house that had not yet learned the lesson written in the melted stone. House Harroway were given the keys to the largest fortress in Westeros, and they accepted with pride, not knowing they were accepting a death sentence signed by a king far worse than any curse. That king was Maegor the Cruel, and his involvement in Harrenhal's bloody history is not a footnote. It is the blade that severed the Harroway line. Maegor was Aegon the Conqueror's second son, a warrior forged in fire and steel, but also a man whose cruelty was legendary even before he sat the Iron Throne. He took the crown after Aegon's death, crushing the faith militant in a war of blood and burning, and he ruled with a fist that knew no mercy. Harrenhal, already a symbol of broken ambition, became a stage for his darkest acts. When he granted the castle to the Harroways, it was not an act of generosity, it was a trap, a test of loyalty, and a lure for the enemies he suspected everywhere. Lord Lucas Harroway was a powerful river lord, ambitious like all who looked upon Harrenhal and saw its potential. He took possession of the castle with her family, his sons, his servants, his entire household. They moved into the ruins, trying to rebuild the wings where the stone still stood, but the shadows of the 5 towers were long and cold. For a short time, it seemed the Harroways might break the pattern. They fortified, they held court, they sent word of their loyalty to King Maegor, but Maegor did not trust them. He had heard whispers that Lord Lucas was in league with the rebels of the faith, that the Harroways harboured sympathies for the very men who had defied the dragon. In the mind of Maegor the Cruel, suspicion was guilt, and guilt demanded annihilation. So the king rode north with his dragon, Balerion, the same beast that had melted Harrenhal to slag 60 years earlier. The black dread descended upon the castle once more, not with fire this time, but with the threat of fire. Maegor entered the gates with a retinue of guards, and he summoned Lord Lucas and all his sons to Great Hall. Some say he accused them of treason directly. Some say he simply smiled and gave the order. The truth is lost in the screams that followed. Lord Lucas Harroway was seized, his sons were dragged before him, and in the very heart of the castle that was meant to be their seat of power, Maegor had them all beheaded. Every male of the Harroway line cut down in a single afternoon. The women were sent to the Silent Sisters, the castle stripped of its new furnishings, and the heads of the Harroway lords mounted on spikes above the king's pyre. It was not a battle, it was a massacre, total annihilation at the hands of the crown. House Harroway did not fade away over generations like the Qoherys. They were erased in a day. The castle had devoured its second family, and the instrument of that devouring was the king himself. But here is the dark truth that began to shape the curse. It was not just the castle that killed, it was the crown's relationship with the castle. Harrenhal was no longer just a cursed ruin, it was a political poison chalice, a gift that might as well have been a death warrant. To be granted Harrenhal was to be marked for destruction, either by the supernatural weight of the stones or by the mortal cruelty of the men who ruled from the Iron Throne. The blood of the Harroways soaked into the floor of the Great Hall, and the castle's reputation grew darker still. Every lord who looked at Harrenhal after that saw not a prize, but a target. The next family to take possession would know the price. And still they would come, because the power of the castle was too great to resist. The pattern was set, and the cycle of doom would continue, grinding through houses like grain through a mill. And the next name on that list, the house that would inherit the shadow of Maegor's cruelty, was House Towers. Their story is one of slow decay, of a family that clung to the ruin until the ruin clung back, and what happened within those crumbling walls would cement Harrenhal's legacy as the castle that never lets go. That is where we will go next, into the slow rot of House Towers. After King Maegor the Cruel finished with House Harroway, the castle sat empty for a time. The blood had barely dried on the stones of the Great Hall, and the throne room still smelled of smoke and old terror. When the Crown decided to try again, the Towers family were the next to receive the poisoned gift. They were a minor house, loyal to the Targaryens, and in the eyes of the king, they were expendable enough to test whether the curse could be broken by simple, unambitious stewardship. Lord Orbit Towers accepted the title with the same mix of honour and dread that had marked every handover since Aegon's day. He moved his household into the blackened shell of a fortress that had once housed thousands. But now the vast dormitories stood empty, the kitchens cold, the stables half cops. The few dozen servants he brought with him were swallowed by the sheer scale of the place. You could walk for 10 minutes through a corridor and see no one. The echoes of your own footsteps would follow you like a second set of legs. Entire wings of the castle were condemned, their ceilings threatening to drop at any moment. The Towers family found themselves rattling around inside a monument to loneliness. The psychological toll began almost immediately. Lord Orbit's wife, Lady Jane, refused to sleep in any chamber that had a view of Kingspire. She claimed the stone still radiated heat, that she could smell burnt flesh on the air, even after all those years. The children grew up in a constant state of low-grade fear, whispering about ghosts in the corridors, about the sound of weeping that seemed to come from the walls. They were not wrong. Harrenhal had been built with forced labour and blood in the mortar. It remembered every scream, but worse than any haunting was the sheer cost of upkeep. A castle designed for an army of garrison soldiers, or a court of hundreds, now had only a few dozen souls to maintain it. Roofs leaked, walls crumbled, and the great iron gates could not be closed without a team of men that simply did not exist. Lord Orbit spent his entire fortune just to keep the rain out of the main hall. He sold his ancestral lands, piece by piece, to pay for masons and carpenters who would work in a place everyone else feared to enter. Within 4 years, the Towers were destitute. Then came the matter of heirs. Lord Orbit and Lady Jane had 3 children. The eldest son, a boy of 12, died after falling from a broken battlement that had not been repaired because there was no money for stonework. The second son contracted a fever that the maester blamed on the damp, the rot, the cold that seeped up from the dungeons like a living thing. He was gone within a fortnight. The only daughter, a girl of 8, was sent away to the faith to become a silent sister, the only path left for a child of a ruined house. There would be no more Towers after that generation. When Lord Orbit himself passed, in a bedchamber that still bore the scorch marks of Balerion's passing, there was no one left to take the title. The castle reverted to the Crown. The Crown, in its infinite wisdom, offered it to yet another family. But Harrenhal had already claimed 3 houses since the conquest. The pattern was set. The castle did not merely kill its lords. It drained them, impoverished them, isolated them until there was nothing left. The Towers family had not died in a dramatic fire or a massacre. They had simply rotted away, like the stone around them, worn thin by a burden no one was meant to bear. The next house to inherit would be the Qoherys line, but that is a story for another time. Before we reach them, we must pause at a moment that changed the entire fate of the realm. A moment when Harrenhal itself became the stage for a decision that would echo for centuries. That chapter is called the Seat of Destiny, a council of 101 AC, and it is perhaps the most dangerous role the castle ever played. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, Hit that like button to help more people discover this story. And so the Towers family withered, their short-lived reign a mirror of the loneliness that clung to Harrenhal like a fog. To live there with only a handful of servants was to feel the weight of a fortress built for an army, its 1,000 empty rooms whispering of the ambition that had raised them and the fire that had scarred them. The castle did not grant power, it consumed it. And by the time the last tower breathed his final sigh, the Iron Throne itself had begun to realise that Harrenhal could not be given to just any house. It needed to be used for something far greater than a lord's vanity. It needed to be a stage for destiny. That moment arrived in the year 101 after the conquest, when King Qoherys I, the old king, faced the most critical decision of his long reign. He had to choose a successor. His sons had died before him, Aemon Balon, and the realm was now divided between two claimants, his granddaughter Rhaenys, the queen who never was, and his grandson Viserys, the son of Balon. The lords of Westeros were fracturing into factions, and a civil war seemed inevitable. But Qoherys, ever the architect of stability, proposed a great council, not just any council, but one that would gather every lord of any standing in the Seven Kingdoms. And he chose Harrenhal as its seat. Why Harrenhal? Why bring the entire realm to the most cursed castle in history? The answer is layered in strategy and symbolism. First, the old king understood that the choice of location must be neutral. King's Landing was the seat of the crown, and any council held there would be seen as favouring the royal household. But Harrenhal lay deep in the Riverlands, far from the immediate influence of the Red Keep. It was a place that belonged to no one and everyone. A hollow monument that could be filled with the collective will of the lords, without the shadow of the Iron Throne looming over every debate. Second, and perhaps more practically, Harrenhal was the only structure in Westeros capable of hosting such an assembly. The Hall of 100 Hearths, that cavernous chamber beneath the castle's broken towers, was built to accommodate entire armies. In its prime, it had held the feasts of Harren the Black's ironborn warriors. Thousands of men at once, their laughter echoing off stone walls that seemed to stretch into darkness. But after centuries of neglect, the hall had become a skeleton of its former self. The 100 hearths, once roaring with fire, were cold and choked with ash. The roof had been repaired in patches, but the vastness of the space still yawned like a forgotten cave. Yet for the great council of 101 AC, the Hall of 100 Hearths was restored to a semblance of life. Tents were pitched inside for the lessers, while the greater lords were given chambers in the surviving towers. The logistics were staggering. How to feed and house nearly 1,000 nobles, plus their retinues, within a ruin that had seen little but decay for generations. Wagons of grain and salted meat rolled in from every corner of the Riverlands. Servants were brought from King's Landing, along with cooks and maesters. The castle's blackened stone walls, still greasy from Balerian's flame, were scrubbed clean for the occasion, and for a few short weeks, Harrenhal pulsed with the noise of politics, of alliances whispered in corridors, of arguments that rose like steam from the endless debates. But the choice of Harrenhal was also a quiet message from the old king. By setting the council in a place defined by the ruin of ambition, Qoherys was reminding every lord of the cost of overreach. Harren the Black had built this castle to be eternal, and within a day it was a tomb. The same fate awaited any house that believed itself above the realm. The great council would decide the succession, but the location itself warned that the throne was not a prize to be grasped carelessly. And there, under the shadow of the melted king's pyre, the lords voted. Viserys was chosen over Rhaenys by a decisive margin. 20-1, the histories say. The decision seemed to bring peace, but it was a peace built on a fault line. The council did not settle the question of female succession. It merely postponed it. Rhaenys' supporters left Harrenhal with bitterness in their hearts. Viserys was crowned, and the realm celebrated. Yet the seeds of the Dance of the Dragons had been planted in that very hall, watered by the curses of a castle that refused to be forgotten. The choice of Harrenhal was not neutral. It was prophetic. The castle that had consumed every house would now set the stage for a war that would consume the dragons themselves. As the lords departed, the echoes of their footsteps faded back into the silence of the 100 hearths, but not all of them left. One family remained behind, a house that had come to the council with little ambition and left with the keys to the greatest ruin in Westeros. They were called Strong, and their rise would be anything but quiet. The Great Council of 101 AC had transformed Harrenhal from a cursed ruin into the stage for the most consequential political gathering in living memory. Thousands of lords, knights and petitioners had filled the Hall of 100 Hearths, their voices echoing off blackened stone that still bore the scars of Balerion's flame. And when the council ended and Viserys Targaryen emerged as the chosen heir, the castle did not return to silence. Instead, it began to breathe again under a new master, a man who had watched the proceedings from the shadows, calculating, patient, and utterly unafraid of the curse that clung to every melted tower. Lyonel Strong was no stranger to Harrenhal. He had served as Master of Laws under King Qoherys, and later under Viserys, and he understood the enormous weight that came with the title Lord of Harrenhal. When the crown offered him the castle and its vast lands, it was both a reward and a test. To accept was to claim the most ill-omened seat in all of Westeros, a fortress that had already consumed House Hoare, House Qoherys, House Harroway, and House Towers in a matter of decades. But Lyonel was a practical man, a scholar of law and governance, and he believed that curses were the inventions of frightened minds. He saw Harrenhal not as a tomb, but as a foundation, a place from which his house could rise, and rise it did. Within a few short years, Lyonel Strong had become Hand of the King to Viserys, the second most powerful man in the realm. He brought order to the king's small council, balanced the competing ambitions of the lords, and earned a reputation for fairness and competence. His voice carried weight in the Red Keep, and his decisions shaped the policies of the Seven Kingdoms. But his true power was rooted not in King's Landing, but in the colossal fortress beside the God's Eye. For Lyonel, Harrenhal was not a curse, it was a stronghold, a legacy he intended to pass to his sons. The eldest of those sons was Harwin Strong, a man of extraordinary physical strength. They called him Breakbones, a name earned through countless Tourney victories and feats of raw power that seemed almost impossible for a man of his stature. Harwin was tall, broad-shouldered, and fiercely loyal. He had been appointed to the King's Guard, the Order of 7 Knights, sworn to protect the king and the royal family, and it was in that role that he became entangled with the most dangerous woman in the realm. Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. Whispers began in the corridors of the Red Keep, then spread through the wine sinks and alleyways of King's Landing. They said Sir Harwin Strong was more than a sworn shield to the princess. They said he was the father of her children, the 3 boys who bore the Targaryen name but showed none of the silver hair or violet eyes of their house. The rumours grew louder with each passing year, stoked by the Queen's faction and the courtiers who delighted in scandal. Harwin's reputation as Breakbones did nothing to silence the gossip. If anything, it lent the stories a kind of brutal credibility. Here was a man of immense physical prowess, the rumours suggested, and he had fathered bastards on the heir to the Iron Throne. Yet the rumours never became proof. Rhaenyra denied them, and her husband Lyonor Velaryon publicly accepted the children as his own. The king himself, Viserys, turned a blind eye, perhaps out of love for his daughter, perhaps out of a willful refusal to see the cracks in his own succession. And Harwin Strong remained in the King's Guard, silent and loyal, watching over Rhaenyra with the same devotion he had always shown. But the tension was a powder keg, and everyone knew it. The Strongs, for their part, felt secure. They had risen from a modest house to the highest offices in the realm. Lyonel was Hand of the King trusted by Viserys. Harwin was a knight of the King's Guard, beloved by the princess, and Larys, the younger son, had found his own path as a confidant to the Queen and a master of whispers. The family seemed untouchable, and Harrenhal, that monstrous castle of 5 melted towers, had become not a curse but a throne. They believed they had tamed it, but the curse does not announce itself with thunder and lightning. It works slowly, patiently, like water seeping through cracked stone. The Strongs had grown comfortable within the walls of Harrenhal. They had filled the hall of 100 hearths with warmth, staffed the kitchens with servants, and hung banners in the great chambers. They convinced themselves that the only danger lay in the ambitions of their enemies, not in the stones beneath their feet. They forgot that every previous lord had also felt secure just before the fire came, and fire, in one form or another, was already being kindled in the shadows of the castle by a hand they never suspected. The rise of House Strong was swift, almost suspiciously so. Lionel Strong, a man whose wisdom and legal mind had earned him the hand of the king, now sat in the shadow of the melted towers at Harrenhal. His son, Harwin Breakbones, was the Golden Knight of the Kingsguard, beloved for his strength and his rumoured devotion to the Princess Rhaenyra. But there was another son, one who rarely stood in the light. Larys Strong, called the Clubfoot, the Cripple, the quiet one who drifted through the corridors of the Red Keep like a rumour-given flesh. While Harwin trained in the yard and Lionel counselled the king, Larys listened. He watched, and in the great haunted halls of Harrenhal, he began to understand something that no one else dared to see. The curse of Harrenhal was not merely a lingering superstition, a ghost story whispered by servants and superstitious lords. It was a tool, a weapon forged from the castle's own bloody history. Larys Strong, with his keen calculating mind, looked at the pattern of extinction, Hoar, Harroway, Towers, Qoherys, and he did not tremble. He studied it. He realised that the curse was a narrative, a story that the realm believed with utter certainty, and if a man could control the story, he could control the outcome. Larys saw that the curse provided the perfect cover for ambition, a fire that could be blamed on a ghost, a death that could be written off as fate. He understood that power in Westeros was not about swords or dragons, but about information, and so he became the master of whisperers, a spider weaving his web in the shadows, using the very legend of the castle to obscure his own designs. Within the walls of Harrenhal, tension grew like mould in the damp stone corridors. Harwin, the strong and blameless, was everything Larys was not. He had the love of the people, the favour of the king, and the whispered affections of the heir to the Iron Throne. Harwin walked upright, while Larys leaned on his cane. Harwin attracted eyes and smiles. Larys attracted pity and avoidance. But pity is a dangerous thing to feel toward a spider. As the brothers moved through the cavernous halls of the castle, a silent war was waged. Harwin continued his affair with Rhaenyra, oblivious to the shadows that followed him. Lionel, blind to the rot in his own bloodline, trusted Larys with the family's secrets. And Larys, with a patience that could only be cultivated by a lifetime of being underestimated, waited. He knew that the curse of Harrenhal did not merely destroy houses. It consumed them from within, using ambition and pride as kindling. He simply decided to light the match. The theory that Larys Strong understood the curse and learned to weaponize it is not just a speculation. It is the only explanation that fits the facts. He did not fear the castle's reputation. He embraced it, nurtured it, and let it become the alibi for his own unspeakable acts. In the quiet of his chambers at Harrenhal, Larys must have smiled as he traced the lineage of every lord who had perished within those blackened stones. He knew that the castle would provide the perfect stage for a tragedy, and the fire that was about to consume his family would be the most convincing act yet. That fire, the inferno that would claim both Harwin and Lionel Strong, would forever change the course of the Dance of the Dragons. It would leave Larys as the sole Lord of Harrenhal, a role he had plotted for with cold precision. But the embers of that blaze still smoulder in the history of Westeros, and we will walk through them next in Chapter 14. The Fire of 120 AC. We ended last time with the Clubfoot, Larys Strong, the Whisperer, in the shadows of King's Landing. He had learned the language of the curse, how to let others believe a fire was fate, a death was destiny, but theory becomes fact only when the flames are lit. In the year 120, after Aegon's conquest, the curse of Harrenhal reached out and took its most prominent victims yet. Lord Lionel Strong, Hand of the King to Viserys I, had returned to his ancestral seat with his eldest son, Sir Harwin Breakbones. Harwin was still reeling from the scandal that had stripped him of his position as commander of the City Watch. The whispers of his affair with Princess Rhaenyra, the parentage of her 3 eldest sons, the court had become unbearable. Father and son journeyed north to the God's Eye, seeking refuge in the cold stone halls of Harrenhal, hoping that distance from the Red Keep would grant them peace. They never left. On a night in the year 120, a fire broke out in the tower that housed Lord Lionel's chambers. The blaze spread with unnatural speed through the ancient stone corridors, feeding on tapestries and wooden furniture. The servants screamed. The guards tried to break down the doors, but the heat was too intense. By the time the flames died, leaving only blackened stone and twisted iron, the bodies of Lord Lionel and Sir Harwin were found in the uppermost room, huddled together, consumed. The official story declared it an accident, a candle knocked over, a spark from a hearth that caught a drapery. The curse of Harrenhal, they said, had claimed its latest victims. The public, the small folk, the lords, even the mesters, accepted this explanation with a shrug. The castle was infamous for its ill luck. Hadn't every house that held it withered into dust? House Strong was just the latest name added to that long, tragic list. But there were those who looked closer. A fire that starts in a lord's private tower, far from the main kitchens and hearths, does not spread like that unless it is fed. The doors were barred from the inside, or so reported the guards. Yet a locked room does not prevent arson when the arsonist is already inside, or when the flames are set before the door is secured. And there was one man who had everything to gain from the deaths of his father and brother. Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, the Master of Whisperers, had remained in King's Landing that night, but his reach extended further than any man suspected. He had spent years cultivating informants, servants and desperate souls who owed him favours. A single bribe to a trusted retainer at Harrenhal, a promise of lands or gold, and the stage was set. The fire that killed Lionel and Harwin was no accident. It was a surgical strike, clearing Larys's path to the lordship of Harrenhal and the power that came with it. Consider the evidence. First, the fire occurred just as Larys's position in court had become precarious. He served Queen Alicent, and the hatred between her faction and Rhaenyra's was reaching a fever pitch. Harwin Strong, the father of Rhaenyra's bastards, was a living threat to Alicent's son Aegon's claim. By removing Harwin, Larys removed a symbol of Rhaenyra's defiance. By removing Lionel, he removed a hand of the king who might have tried to mediate between the queens. In one night, Larys solved 2 problems and inherited a castle. Second, Larys's own behaviour after the fire was telling. He did not mourn publicly. He did not call for an investigation. Instead, he immediately travelled to Harrenhal, assumed the lordship, and began consolidating his power. He allowed the legend of the curse to do his work for him. Let the people whisper that House Strong was doomed, that the castle devoured its masters. It was the perfect cover for a political assassination. Who would dare question a curse? Who would look for a murderer when they could blame a millennia-old spell? The public, indeed, was all too willing to believe. The story of Harrenhal's curse had been passed down for generations. The blood in the mortar, the arrogance of Harren the Black, the dragon fire that melted the towers, a fire that killed the lord and his heir. It fit the pattern. It felt inevitable. The small folk of the Riverlands crossed themselves and muttered prayers. The lords of the realm nodded wisely and said, Harrenhal takes what it is given. But beneath that convenient narrative, a darker truth festered. Larys the Clubfoot had mastered the curse, not by breaking it, but by bending it to his will. He had turned a supernatural reputation into a weapon of misdirection, and with his father and brother dead, he became the sole lord of the largest fortress in Westeros, a position that would make him indispensable in the coming war. The fire of 120 AC was not the end of House Strong. It was the beginning of Larys's true ascent, and as the embers cooled on the blackened stones of Harrenhal, a new occupant was already setting his sights on the castle, a man of fire and blood who had once claimed the title of heir to the Iron Throne, a man who knew that any castle that could devour its lords could also shelter an army. But that tale, the occupation of Daemon Targaryen, is a story for another night. The fire that consumed Lord Lionel Strong and his son Harwin left Harrenhal in the hands of Larys the Clubfoot, a man who understood the castle's darkness better than any who had come before. But Larys was no warrior. He had no interest in leading armies or holding the Great Hall against a siege. He was a creature of shadows and whispers. And for the opening years of the Dance of the Dragons, he kept the castle in a state of cold neutrality. That silence would not last, because a storm was coming from the east, a dragon who had been forged in the stepstones and tempered by exile. Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, was about to claim Harrenhal as his own. By the time war erupted between the Blacks and the Greens, Harrenhal stood as the single most strategically vital fortress in the Riverlands. It sat at the crossroads of the realm, commanding the approaches to the Trident and the King's Road. Any army that held it could threaten King's Landing from the north, or cut off the supply lines of the Lannisters from the west. The River Lords were split. Some declared for Rhaenyra, others for Aegon the Elder, and many sat on the fence, waiting to see which way the wind blew. Daemon knew that to win the war, he needed to break that paralysis. He needed a foothold, a base from which he could project power across the Heartland. And so, in the year 129 after Aegon's conquest, the rogue prince took flight on Caryxes, the Bloodworm, and descended upon Harrenhal. The castle's garrison at that time was small. Larys Strong had left only a skeleton crew to hold the walls, and they were no match for the dragon that landed in the yard. Daemon did not need to burn a single tower. The mere sight of Caryxes, with his serpentine neck and crimson scales, was enough to convince the Castellan to open the gates. The rogue prince entered Harrenhal not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. At least that was how he presented. He declared the castle was now the seat of the Queen's war effort, and he would use it to unite the Riverlands under Rhaenyra's banner. The local lords, many of whom had been wavering, began to flock to him. They saw Harrenhal as a symbol of power, and Daemon as a figure who could wield it. But there was something strange about the place. The moment Daemon set foot inside, the great hall, known as the Hall of 100 Hearths, was vast and cold, its blackened walls still bearing the scars of Balerian's fire. The towers leaned at odd angles, their melted stone frozen into grotesque shapes. Daemon had heard the stories of the curse, of course. He was a Targaryen, raised on tales of his family's conquest. He dismissed the whispers as superstition, the grumblings of small folk who feared what they did not understand. But as the days turned into weeks, the castle began to work on him in ways he could not explain. The psychological toll of living within Harrenhal is something that historians often overlook, but it was very real. The castle was built for a garrison of thousands, yet during Daemon's occupation, it housed only a few hundred men at most. The corridors stretched on for miles, empty and echoing. At night the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying sounds that could have been the cries of long-dead slaves or the laughter of Harren the Black himself. Daemon began to suffer from sleeplessness. He would wander the halls alone, his sword drawn, searching for an enemy that never appeared. Some say he started talking to himself. Others claim he saw visions. It is from this period that the first reports of a mysterious woman emerge. She was seen in the courtyards, or standing atop the King's Pyre Tower, her long dark hair blowing in the wind. The soldiers called her a witch or a ghost. Some believed she was the spirit of the castle itself, a manifestation of the curse that had destroyed every house that tried to hold Harrenhal. Daemon, ever the pragmatist at first, questioned her, but as his mental state frayed, he began to seek her out. She was said to have the gift of prophecy, and she spoke to him of the future, of a war that would consume his family, and of a fate that awaited him beyond the God's eye. This woman, whom history would remember as Alys Rivers, became Daemon's confidant, his oracle, and perhaps something more. Their relationship is one of the most mysterious episodes of the dance. She was no princess, no noble. She was a bastard of House Strong, a healer and a seer, living in the shadow of the great castle. Yet she held the rogue prince in thrall. He listened to her warnings. He heeded her counsel, and the more time he spent in Harrenhal, the more he changed. From a strategic standpoint, Daemon's occupation was a success. He used a castle as a base to rally the river lords, and within months he had assembled a formidable army. He sent ravens to every lord in the region, demanding they declare for Queen Rhaenyra. Those who refused found themselves facing the wrath of Caraxes. The castle's massive walls allowed him to store supplies, train troops, and plan the campaign that would eventually lead to the capture of King's Landing. Harrenhal became the heart of Team Black's war effort, a heart that beat with the blood of dragons. But the castle also drained him. Daemon, who had always been bold, reckless and full of fire, grew quieter. He spent long hours in the library, poring over old scrolls and histories. He would stare at the melted towers and mutter about the folly of men who built monuments to their own vanity. The irony was not lost on him. Harrenhal had been built by a tyrant who thought himself invincible, and it had been destroyed by a dragon. Now Daemon, a dragon rider, was living in its ruins. He was beginning to see the pattern, the cycle that the curse represented. It was there, in the shadow of the King's Pyre, that Daemon made the decision to leave. He could not stay in Harrenhal forever. The war called him to the field, to face his enemies in open combat. But before he departed, he had one last conversation with the woman in the tower. She told him that his fate was sealed, that he would not return from the battle to come. Daemon, who had faced death many times, simply smiled. He kissed her hand, mounted Caraxes, and flew south. Harrenhal, after Daemon, lay quiet once more, but its curse was far from spent. The castle would pass to new hands, each more unfortunate than the last, and the woman who had haunted Daemon's stay, the one who had seen the future in the flames of the hearth, would remain. Her name would echo through the centuries, a whisper of power and madness. She is the Witch Queen of Harrenhal, and her story is the thread that ties the castle's darkest chapter together. Daemon Targaryen had claimed Harrenhal in the name of the Black Queen, planting his banner atop the twisted spire of King's Pyre. But the castle never truly surrendered to any lord. It merely tolerated them, waiting, and as the rogue prince paced those blackened halls, wrestling with ghosts and strategies, another presence stirred in the shadows of the great fortress that did not answer to dragons. She had always been there, some said, woven into the very stones, a whisper among the ash. Her name was Alys Rivers, and she arrived in the records of the Dance of the Dragons, not as a queen by coronation, but as something far older and stranger. When the Greens seized Harrenhal after Daemon's departure, a new garrison settled into the ruin, commanded by Prince Aemon Targaryen himself, the one-eyed dragon rider who had claimed Vargo. And among the servants, the camp followers, the survivors of countless fires, there was this woman, pale, silent, with eyes that seemed to catch the light of distant flames even in the deepest hour of night. She was already infamous before Aemon ever took notice. The rumours that clung to Alys Rivers were as thick as the smoke that once rose from the melting towers. Some whispered she was a wood switch, one of those mysterious women of the forest who spoke to the old gods and read the future in the flight of crows. Others claimed she was no mere hedge witch, but the bastard daughter of Simon Strong, a forgotten lord of Harrenhal, born on the wrong side of the sheets and left to wander the castle's endless galleries. Yet neither explanation fully accounted for what she could do. She healed wounds that should have festered, predicted deaths before they happened, and when men looked at her too long, they often found themselves dreaming of towers collapsing into emerald fire. Alys Rivers did not merely occupy Harrenhal. She seemed to inhabit its very curse, a living extension of the castle's appetite for ambition, and she had a particular gift for influence. The soldiers who held the fort was hard men from the river lands and the crown lands, hardened further by war, found themselves drawn to her counsel. They brought her their fears, their secrets, their suspicions about the enemy camps beyond the lake. She listened with a stillness that made the air feel heavier, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of prophecy. No one dared dismiss her as a madwoman, not after the first few predictions came true, but it was her influence over Aemond Targaryen that would echo through the rest of the dance. The prince arrived at Harrenhal, expecting a strategic stronghold, a base from which to burn Rhaenyra's supporters out of the Riverlands. Instead, he found a woman who seemed to know him better than he knew himself. She spoke of his missing eye, of the debt he owed the world, of the dreams that plagued him since childhood. Some chroniclers suggest she used potions, others a kind of sorcery, but whatever her method, she became his confidant, his advisor, and eventually his lover. The one-eyed prince, who had never bowed to any authority, began to listen when Alys Rivers told him of visions. Visions of a prince dying in fire above a lake, visions of a dragon falling into the water, visions of a final confrontation that would leave no victor. And so the Witch Queen of Harrenhal wove herself into the fabric of the war. She was not content to simply observe the doom of houses. She wanted a hand in the writing. When she looked at Aemond, she saw not a conqueror but a sacrifice, and perhaps she saw her own role as the one who would guide him to that fate. The castle seemed to approve. The walls groaned less in her presence. The fires in the hearths burned with a strange, steady green hue, and the men who occupied Harrenhal began to speak of her in hushed tones, certain that she was the castle's true ruler, not the prince with the sapphire eye. Yet for all her power, Alys Rivers remains one of the most enigmatic figures in the annals of Westerosi history. Was she a witch, a bastard, a seer, or merely a clever woman who understood that fear was the truest currency in a cursed fortress? Perhaps all of those things. What we do know is that when the time came for Aemon Targaryen to leave Harrenhal for his final confrontation, her words followed him like a shadow, a prophecy of blood and dragonfire written on the surface of the god's eye. And that prophecy, that final meeting between the rogue prince and the one-eyed prince, would turn the lake itself into a pyre. But that is a story for another chapter, a story of two dragons and one terrible oath. Up next is the blood of the dragon on the god's eye, where the curse of Harrenhal reaches its most violent and beautiful conclusion. The Witch Queen of Harrenhal, Alys Rivers, had whispered her prophecies into the ears of the men who passed through the cursed castle's halls. She saw the blood that would be spilled, the dragons that would fall, and the lake that would swallow them whole. But even her visions, clouded as they were by smoke and fire, could not have prepared the realm for what was about to unfold above the god's eye. It was the dying years of the Dance of the Dragons, a war that had already consumed nearly every member of House Targaryen. The two remaining dragons of any consequence belonged to the most dangerous men alive: Prince Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, rider of Caraxes, the bloodworm, and Prince Aemon Targaryen, the one-eyed kinslayer, rider of Vagar the she-dragon, the largest living beast in all the world. Both had been shaped by Harrenhal in different ways. Daemon had occupied the castle, brooding within its melted towers, haunted by the weight of its curse. Aemond had never set foot inside. But the castle's shadow had stretched across the Riverlands, and his dragon had terrorized its lands. Now fate had drawn them both to the same place. The God's Eye, the great lake that mirrored the sky, its surface dark and deep as a forgotten memory. The duel was not a battle of armies. It was a single savage confrontation between two princes, two dragons, and two fates that had been entwined since childhood. Daemon, older and more reckless, had always despised Aemond for his arrogance, for his stolen eye, for the throne he defended. Aemond, in turn, had despised Daemon as the embodiment of everything wrong with House Targaryen. Ambition without loyalty, fire without discipline. And so, above the waters of the God's Eye, beneath the shadow of Harrenhal's broken ramparts, they met. Caraxes and Vhagar clashed in the twilight. The sky became a furnace of flame and fury. Daemon fought not like a general, but like a demon. His sword Dark Sister wet with dragon's blood. Aemond, younger and stronger, matched him blow for blow. The dragons twisted and tore at each other, their roars shaking the ancient stones of the castle below. And then, in a final, terrible embrace, both beasts locked together and plummeted from the heavens. They fell into the God's Eye, their bodies crashing through the dark water, sending up a wave that seemed to swallow the world. The lake, which had for centuries reflected the castle's curse, now held the secret of the Targaryen death struggle. It is said that Daemon and Aemond perished together, their bodies never recovered. But the moment they struck the water, the curse of Harrenhal claimed its most spectacular victims. For the castle was not just a pile of ash and stone. It was a force that devoured ambition, and no ambition was greater than that of a dragon rider. The two most dangerous men in the realm, their dragons, their fire. All were extinguished in the same cold embrace of the God's Eye. The blood of the dragon, that sacred lineage that had once seemed immortal, was now mingling with the waters that lapped at Harrenhal's walls. Think of the symbolism. Harren the Black had built his fortress to be invincible, only to be melted alive by Balerion the Black Dread. Now, a century later, the same castle witnessed the end of two of Balerion's own descendants. The cycle of fire and water, of pride and punishment, had come full circle. The lake swallowed what the fire could not burn, and the curse, ever patient, waited for the next fool to claim the title. But the story of Harrenhal does not end with the dragons. The castle had other horrors in store, other rulers who would test their luck against its stones. One of them was a woman whose madness would become legend, whose name would be whispered by generations to come. She would take the castle and fill its halls with blood and shadow. Her name was Danelle Lothston, and what she did within those walls would make even the dance of the dragon seem tame by comparison. But that is a story for another night. For now, the waters of the God's Eye still ripple with the memory of the fallen princes, and Harrenhal stands silent, waiting. The echoes of dragonfire had barely faded from the God's Eye when a new darkness began to stir within Harrenhal's twisted spires. For centuries, the castle had devoured its lords, 4 Harroway, Qoherys strong, each consumed in a familiar rhythm of ambition and fire. But after the dance of the dragons, after Daemon Targaryen and Aemond fell into the lake in a tangle of blade and beast, the curse seemed to take on a stranger, quieter shape. It no longer needed dragons to claim its victims. It whispered through stone and shadow, and the one who answered that whisper was a woman who would become a legend of pure madness. The post-war era left the riverlands broken. The dance had scorched fields, emptied villages, and turned the Trident into a river of ash. The Iron Throne, now under the regency of Aegon III, was weak and distracted, and Harrenhal, massive, hollow and blackened, sat like a wound in the heart of the realm. It needed a lord, but no house of any real standing wanted to touch it, so the crown turned to a minor family, one with no history at that cursed castle, one that could be raised up quickly and discarded just as fast if the curse came calling. That family was House Lothston. They were not born of the old Riverlands bloodlines. Their name had little weight, but their ambition was sharp, and at the head of that ambition stood a woman whose reputation would eclipse her entire house. Danelle Lothston, the Lady of Harrenhal. She came to the castle sometime in the early years of Aegon III's reign, and from the moment she crossed the drawbridge, something shifted. The air around her seemed to thicken. The servants whispered that she never blinked, that she spoke to the melted walls as if they answered. At first, Danelle was simply an oddity, a stern, reclusive woman who refused to leave her towers. But soon the rumours began, and they were unlike any that had haunted Harrenhal before. The castle had always been a place of death, but this was something else. It was said that Danelle had taken to bathing in blood, not the blood of animals but of men, prisoners, servants, travellers who strayed too close to the god's eye. She would have them brought to the highest chamber of Kingspire, and when the screams stopped, her maids would carry out buckets of crimson water, warm and steaming, even in the depths of winter. No one could say for certain where the blood came from. The maesters of the citadel recorded only scraps, dismissing the tales as peasant superstition. But the stories persisted. They said she kept a basin carved from the melted stone of the original towers, and into that basin she poured the life of anyone who displeased her. She believed the blood would preserve her youth, that it would keep the curse at bay. She thought she could outsmart the darkness that had claimed every lord before her. And then there were the dark arts. Danelle was not content with mere brutality. She sought power in the old ways, the forbidden ways. She surrounded herself with hedge witches, wood switches, and men who whispered of the blood of Valyria. She conducted rituals in the shadow of the Kingspire Tower, her voice rising and falling in a tongue that no living man understood. The townsfolk of Harrentown claimed they could see strange lights flickering in the windows at night, green and purple and black, and that the ravens around the castle grew bold and vicious, as if they too were under her spell. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a septon who visited Harrenhal in the year 140 after Aegon's conquest. He wrote that the Lady Danelle received him in the Great Hall, but the hall had been transformed. The tapestries were gone, replaced by hundreds of candles arranged in patterns that hurt the eyes. And there at the centre of the room sat Danelle herself, her hair white as bone, her nails long and yellowed. She offered him wine, but when he declined, she laughed and said, "You think I would poison you? No, Septon. I save that for those I do not like." He left the next morning, vowing never to return. But even madness has limits, and so does the crown's patience. House Lothston's hold on Harrenhal had lasted a few decades, and in that time the stories grew so dark that they reached the ears of the king himself. Aegon III, a man who had seen dragons die and his family betray him, was not one to be easily disturbed. Yet the reports from the Riverlands were too consistent, too terrible to ignore. The small folk were fleeing the lands around the God's Eye. Merchants refused to travel within 10 leagues of the castle, and the neighbouring lords, led by the powerful houses of the Riverlands, demanded intervention. The crown could not suffer a madwoman in the heart of the realm, especially one who might be dabbling in magic. And so, in roughly the year 145 after the conquest, King Aegon III ordered the removal of House Lothston. The execution of that order is murky. Maesters disagree on the details. Some say the castle was besieged. Others claim that Danelle simply vanished, her fate unknown. What is certain is that the Lothston line was extinguished, and Harrenhal fell back to the crown, empty and waiting once more. But even in her downfall, Danelle left a stain. The legends of her bloodbaths and her dark arts became woven into the very fabric of the curse. From that point on, no one spoke of Harrenhal without mentioning the Mad Lady. She joined the ranks of Harren the Black and Maegor the Cruel, ghost in the castle's eternal memory. And when the next house came to claim the fortress, a house that would carry the sigil of a bat and cast a shadow longer than any before, they would inherit not just the curse of the stones, but the echo of a woman who tried to cheat it with blood. That is the story we will turn to next, in a chapter called House Whent and the Bat's Shadow, because sometimes the curse does not need to destroy a house with fire. Sometimes it just waits until the darkness inside the walls becomes too loud to ignore. After Mad Danelle Lothston, Harrenhal fell into a silence so deep it almost felt like the castle itself was holding its breath. The blood had dried, the mad laughter faded, and the towers stood black and twisted against the sky, waiting. For decades, the great fortress passed from hand to hand, like a poisoned chalice, each new lord more desperate than the last to claim its crumbling halls. But then came a house that believed it could break the curse, a house that looked at those melted walls and saw not ruin but opportunity. That house was House Whent, and their sigil was a bat, a creature of shadow and night, perfectly suited to a castle that had become a legend of darkness. The Whents were not ancient nobility. They were a family of relatively modest origins, raised to power through marriage and royal favour. When Harrenhal was granted to them, they saw it as a chance to restore the castle's former glory, to make it livable again, to scrub away the stains of centuries of madness and fire. But restoring Harrenhal was no small task. The 5 towers still leaked smoke from the dragons of old, and the stones seemed to remember every scream that echoed through the halls. The Whents set to work with a determination that bordered on obsession. They rebuilt the kitchens, the great hall, the barracks. They brought in fresh timber, new tapestries, and servants who whispered prayers before entering the gates. Yet no matter how much they repaired, the castle always seemed to resist them. Doors that were locked would be found open at dawn. Fires that were carefully banked would burn brighter than any flame should. And at night, the servants swore they could hear the flapping of wings. That bat on the Whent banner was more than a heraldic choice. It was a reflection of Harrenhal's true nature. The castle had always been a place of shadows, of things that flit and flutter just beyond the edge of sight. The bat is a creature of the in-between, neither bird nor beast, a dweller in caves and ruins. What better symbol for a fortress that sat at the boundary between the living and the dead? The Whents embraced this imagery, perhaps hoping that by owning the darkness, they could control it. But Harrenhal had a way of twisting such intentions. The bat became not a protector, but an omen. When Lady Shella Whent ruled the castle in the final years of the Targaryen dynasty, the bat hung from every banner, stitched into every surcoat, but the shadows only grew deeper. The Whents played a quiet but significant role in the twilight of the Dragon Kings. They were loyal vassals to the Iron Throne, during a time when loyalty was a dangerous currency. Lord Walter Whent, Shella's brother, was a renowned knight and a close ally of the crown. He hosted tournaments at Harrenhal, grand events that drew the finest knights from across the 7 kingdoms. These tournaments were meant to showcase the castle's resurgence, to prove that Harrenhal could still be a place of chivalry and honour. But even as the lances clashed and the crowds cheered, the curse lurked beneath the festivities. More than one knight died mysteriously in the castle's shadow. More than one horse bolted in terror for no discernible reason, and the Whents themselves began to feel the weight of the stone. By the time of the great tournament that would later be called the Tourney of the False Spring, House Whent had become synonymous with the haunted majesty of Harrenhal. The castle was still vast, still awe-inspiring, but it was also a place where the air itself felt heavy with memory. The Whents tried to restore glory, but they could not restore innocence. Harrenhal had been built on blood and ambition, and no amount of fresh mortar could wash that away. The bat flew overhead, silent and watchful, as the last Targaryens danced their final dance. And when the dynasty fell, so too would the Whents, their name joining the long list of houses that had been devoured by the castle they tried to tame. But before that end, there was one more tournament. A tournament that would change everything. A tournament that would be remembered as the false spring of hope before the long winter of war. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. House Whent's bat banners may have been a fitting omen for what was to come, because the shadows they cast over Harrenhal were about to stretch across all of Westeros in a way no one could have predicted. For decades after the madness of Danelle Lothston, the castle had been a place of ruin and whispers, its walls stained by fire and blood, its towers leaning like crooked teeth against the sky. Then came House Whent, a family that dared to believe they could restore the castle's faded glory. They rebuilt the Great Hall. They hung their sigil, a black bat upon a golden field, over the gate, and for a time Harrenhal seemed almost alive again. But the curse does not forget. It does not forgive. And it was under House Whent's watch that the castle would host the grandest event in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. An event that would become the very spark that burned a kingdom. The year was 281 after Aegon's conquest. Winter had gripped the land for nearly a decade, a long, cruel season that seemed to drain the warmth from the world itself. Then, a strange thing happened. The snows began to melt. The rivers thawed. Flowers bloomed in fields that had been white and dead for years. It was a false spring, a brief, deceptive, warm spell that fooled the lords and small folk alike into thinking winter had finally released its hold. And in that false spring, Lord Walter Whent of Harrenhal decided to host a tournament the likes of which had never been seen. He invited knights from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, from the frozen north to the sun-scorched south. He promised prizes beyond measure, feasts that would last for weeks, and a chance for the greatest warriors of the age to prove their mettle beneath the shadow of the melted towers. The tourney began on the shores of the God's Eye, and it was magnificent. Tents of silk and velvet rose in fields that had been mud and ice just weeks before. Banners of every major house fluttered in the breeze. The direwolf of Stark, the stag of Baratheon, the lion of Lannister, the rose of Tyrell, and of course, the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. The king himself, Arys II, was too paranoid to attend, but his son and heir, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, came in his place. And with him came the most beautiful woman in the realm, his wife, Elia Martell of Dorne, along with their two young children. For days the jousts and melees unfolded. Knights charged across the lists, lances shattering against shields, while the crowd roared and the wine flowed freely. It was the last time so many great houses would gather in peace. But the curse of Harrenhal was already stirring. Beneath the laughter and the cheers, old rivalries simmered. Lord Robert Baratheon, the young Storm Lord, had come with his foster father Jon Arryn and his closest friend Eddard Stark. Robert was betrothed to Lyanna Stark, Eddard's younger sister, and he was madly in love with her. But Lyanna was not so certain. She had a wildness in her, a love of freedom that no castle could contain. And when she first laid eyes on Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, something shifted in the air. Rhaegar was not like other Targaryens. He was brooding, melancholic, a warrior who played the harp and read ancient prophecies. He believed he was destined to be a hero, to fulfill some long-forgotten prophecy about a prince that was promised. And at Harrenhal he saw Lyanna. The joust reached its climax. Rhaegar Targaryen rode against a series of challengers, unhorsing them one by one with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Finally, he defeated Ser Barristan Selmy, the greatest knight of the age, and won the tourney. Traditionally, the victor of a grand tourney crowns a queen of love and beauty, a woman of his choosing, with a garland of blue winter roses. Every eye turned to Princess Elia, who sat in the royal box, smiling, expecting her husband to honour her. But Rhaegar Targaryen did not ride toward his wife. He rode past her, past the High Lords, past the entire assembled court, until he stopped before Lyanna Stark. He placed the wreath of blue winter roses in her lap, and the entire stadium fell silent. It was a moment that would burn a kingdom. The insult to Elia Martell was public and brutal. The insult to House Stark was worse, because Lyanna was already promised to Robert Baratheon. And yet there was a look in Rhaegar's eyes, a hint of fate and obsession, that said this was not mere infatuation. He believed he had found the woman he needed to fulfill a prophecy. Lyanna, for her part, did not refuse the crown. She accepted it, and the seeds of war were sown. That is how the curse of Harrenhal manifested, in the event that triggered Robert's rebellion, not in fire or plague, but in choice and chance and ambition. The castle that had devoured every house now turned its hunger upon the realm itself. Rhaegar Targaryen, Lyanna Stark, and the spark that burned a kingdom. All of it began under those blackened towers. Within a year, Rhaegar would abduct or elope with Lyanna. Brandon Stark, her brother, would ride to King's Landing demanding justice and be executed by the Mad King along with his father. Robert Baratheon would call his banners. Jon Arryn would raise his own, and the Seven Kingdoms would tear themselves apart in a war that ended the Targaryen dynasty and placed a new king on the Iron Throne. But the false spring had already passed. Winter returned, colder and longer than before, as if the land itself mourned what had been lost, and Harrenhal once again stood empty and broken, its halls echoing with the memory of roses and blood. The curse had not ended. It had only moved on to its next victim, for the echoes of that false spring would reverberate for decades, leading to a war that would shatter the Targaryen dynasty and set the stage for the next cycle of bloodshed. A cycle that would once again find its centre at Harrenhal, and when that cycle came, it would be called the War of the Five Kings. A conflict that would drag the castle back into the light and into the heart of a new storm. The tourney of the false spring was a moment of gilded illusion, a glittering mask laid over a kingdom already bleeding from within. And when the mask fell, when Rhaegar Targaryen rode past his own wife to crown Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty, the crack that ran through Westeros became a chasm. That chasm swallowed a dynasty. But Harrenhal, as always, endured. It waited. For centuries, the great blackened fortress sat in the shadow of its own legend, a ruin of melted stone and forgotten promises, passed between hands like a poisoned chalice. Then, nearly 300 years after Balerion the Black Dread turned its towers to slag, the castle was dragged back into the light of war, not as a symbol of rebellion, but as a prize, as a hub, as a feeding ground for the ambitions of men who thought themselves immune to the curse. The War of the Five Kings erupted like a wildfire across the Riverlands, and at the heart of that fire, straddling the God's Eye with its 5 twisted spires, stood Harrenhal. It was no longer a relic of a bygone age. It became the single most strategic stronghold in the conflict, capable of housing 10,000 men, commanding the crossroads of the Trident, and controlling the flow of supplies between the north, the Vale, and the Crownlands. For the first time in generations, the old curse was not a whispered legend. It was a tactical reality. Every lord who set his sights on the Iron Throne understood that whoever held Harrenhal held the keys to the Riverlands, and the Riverlands, in this war, would be the anvil upon which the realm was hammered. The Lannisters understood this better than anyone. Tywin Lannister, the Old Lion, did not believe in ghosts. He believed in gold, in steel, in fear. When he marched his army into the Riverlands, he did not come to make friends. He came to burn a lesson into the land, a lesson that would echo for generations. And he chose Harrenhal as his seat of operations, not because he respected its history, not because he feared its reputation, but because it was the largest, most defensible position in the region, and because he knew that a castle of such magnitude would intimidate his enemies as much as it sheltered his troops. Tywin's occupation of Harrenhal was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of superstition. He dismissed the tales of the haunted castle, the whispers of Alys rivers, the bloody baths of mad Danelle Lothston, the cursed fate of every house that had ever claimed the stronghold. He was a man of the present, of the tangible. To him, the curse was a story for frightened children and defeated lords. He turned the great hall into a war room, the stone floors echoing with the clatter of boots and the scratching of quills as he plotted the systematic destruction of his rivals. He slept in the King's Pyre Tower, the very tower where Harren the Black had roasted alive in his own armour. And he felt nothing but the chill of the autumn air. But while Tywin Lannister sat in his command chamber, his shadow stretched far beyond the castle walls. He dispatched his most feared weapon, Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides, to scour the Riverlands clean. And the mountain did not scour. He butchered, he burned, he raped. He left villages as blackened skeletons, fields as salted graves. The rivers that fed the gods, ran red with the blood of small folk. And the smoke from 100 pyres drifted toward Harrenhal's broken towers as if the castle itself was breathing in the death. The brutality was not random. It was a message from Tywin Lannister to every lord who dared to defy the Iron Throne. The Riverlands would be made to kneel, or the Riverlands would be made to disappear. And in the midst of this systematic horror, Harrenhal became more than a military base. It became a vortex. Prisoners were dragged through its gates, many never to leave. Mercenaries squabbled in its halls. The brave companions, a company of cutthroats under the command of Vargo Hoat, were given the castle as a reward, but quickly turned it into a den of torture and extortion. The castle devoured them too, of course. It always does. But in that moment, in the thick of the War of the Five Kings, the curse of Harrenhal was not a whisper from the past. It was the grinding of boot leather on ancient stone, the scream of a man being flayed in the yard, the moan of wind through the melted windows of King's Pyre Tower. It was the face of a little girl, Arya Stark, hiding in the shadows, watching the Mountain's men drag a prisoner to the cells. But we will come to her story. For now, understand this. Tywin Lannister sat in the heart of the cursed castle, convinced that he had tamed it, that he had bent the will of Harrenhal to his own iron purpose. He did not see the ghosts. He did not hear the whispers. He only saw victory, and that blindness, that refusal to believe that the castle had a will of its own, would set the stage for one of the most haunting, intimate encounters the fortress had seen since the dragonfire first cooled. Because Harrenhal does not care for lions. It waits, it watches, and when it is ignored for too long, it reminds the world that it is not merely a stone cage. It is a tomb with a hunger, and soon that hunger would fasten itself on the one person who could not be bought with gold or broken by fear. The next chapter belongs to a ghost and a girl, to the moment when the walls themselves seem to breathe, and the truth of Harrenhal's curse was not whispered in a war room but spoken in the dark by a voice that should not have existed. Something is stirring in the cellars of Harrenhal, something that has nothing to do with the War of the Five Kings, and the girl who sees it will never be the same. That story waits for us now. It is the story of Arya Stark and the ghost in Harrenhal. Tywin Lannister stood in the great hall of Harrenhal and saw only stone and strategy. He dismissed the whispers of ghosts as the mutterings of superstitious fools, believing that a castle could no more be cursed than a sword could think. But the castle does not need to be cursed by magic to become a tomb. It needs only war and fear and the desperate cruelty of men who have forgotten they are human. And from the moment the Lannister banners were raised above the melting towers, the castle began to digest its new occupants in the old, slow way it always had. The ghost that walked Harrenhal in those days was not a spectre of smoke and bone. It was a child. Arya Stark arrived at Harrenhal in chains, a captive among the thousands of prisoners swept up in the War of the Five Kings. She had been stripped of her name, her family, her sword, and even her identity as a girl of noble birth. To the men who held the castle, she was just another ragged survivor, a mouse in the rubble. But inside that small, frightened body lived something that no lord or mercenary could measure. She was the daughter of Winterfell, the sister of the king in the north, and she had seen her father's head severed from his shoulders by the order of the Iron Throne. She had watched her brother's army burn and scatter. She had been beaten, hunted, and dragged through the mud of a continent at war, and the one thing that kept her alive was a list. In her mind, Arya carried a list of names. Every night she would whisper them to herself. A litany of men who had wronged her family, who had laughed at her father's death, who had stood by while the Lannisters tore the world apart. She did not have a sword, and she did not have a god, but she had the names, and she had the conviction that if she lived long enough, she would find a way to make them pay. The list was her prayer, her anchor, her only remaining thread of purpose in a world that had become a nightmare. And inside the walls of Harrenhal, that nightmare grew teeth. The castle itself was a labyrinth of ruin and shadow. The Lannister garrison occupied the more intact halls, but the rest of the fortress sprawled in collapsed formlessness, a graveyard of stones that still reeked of dragonfire. Arya was put to work as a cupbearer to Tywin Lannister himself, a role that forced her to stand beside the man who had masterminded the destruction of her house. Every day she poured his wine, listened to his strategies, and hid the hatred that burned behind her eyes. She became a ghost in plain sight, invisible because she was small, silent because she had learned that words were dangerous. And in that role, she saw the truth of the castle, that the curse was not a supernatural plague, but the natural consequence of ambition left unchecked. The fall of the Lannister garrison began not with a battle, but with a bowl of soup. The castle was held by the Lannisters and their mercenary allies, a company called the Brave Companions, led by a man named Vargo Hoat. They were a pack of scavengers, loyal to no cause but coin and cruelty. They tortured prisoners for sport, mutilated men for speaking out of turn, and treated the castle as their own private hunting ground. Among the prisoners was a boy named Weasel, a false identity Arya adopted to hide her true name. She watched as the Brave Companions brought captured soldiers from the Northern Army into the castle yard, and as their screams echoed off the blackened walls. Then came the night of the Weasel Soup. It was not a grand military operation. It was a kitchen rebellion, a desperate act of sabotage by a group of prisoners who had nothing left to lose. Arya was part of it. She helped sneak bowls of poisoned soup to the Lannister guards, a broth laced with a substance that would send them into spasms of vomiting and weakness. The attack was timed with an uprising from the northern prisoners inside the castle. And, in the chaos that followed, the Lannister presence in Harrenhal crumbled. The garrison fell not to an army, but to the rage of the oppressed. And in that moment, Arya saw something that would never leave her. The sight of men who believed themselves invincible, brought low by the very people they had crushed under their heels. 3 deaths she commanded within those walls, not by her own hand, but by the force of her will, by the whispers of the list that had become her scripture. She named the names of the men who had wronged her, and one by one they met the stranger. The first was a guard who had beaten her. The second was a man who had bragged about killing her brother's bannerman. The third was a knight who had laughed when her father died. And though she did not strike the blows, she was the architect of their doom. She learned that power does not always sit on a throne, that a ghost can kill without leaving a mark. In that ruined castle, Arya Stark became something more than a child. She became a reckoning. The psychological horror of the Weasel Soup incident was not in the violence, but in the silence that followed. The dead were dragged away, the floors were scrubbed, and the castle returned to its watchful stillness. But the survivors knew that something had shifted. The Lannisters had been taught that no wall, no garrison, no lord's authority could protect them from the hunger of the desperate. And the ghosts of Harrenhal, both real and imagined, had claimed another set of names for its ledger. By the time Arya escaped that place, she had become something hard and sharp, a fragment of steel forged in the furnace of war. The castle had not broken her. It had taught her the only lesson that mattered, that death is not a distant threat, but a tool, and she was learning how to use it. But the castle was not finished with its appetite. The Brave Companions, the men known as the Bloody Mummers, remained. Their leader, Vargo Hoat, still stalked the halls, and he had seen something in that little girl that he did not understand. He would soon find that the ghost of Harrenhal was not a solitary spectre, but a chorus of voices waiting for their turn to be heard. And the next act of this tragedy belongs to the Mummers and their dance of blades. Arya Stark saw Harrenhal through the eyes of a child, but the castle had another lesson to teach her, one written in the blood of the men who held it next. The Brave Companions were not lords, not knights, not even true soldiers. They were mercenaries, a sellsword company from the east, and their arrival at Harrenhal was the moment the castle's curse shifted from a slow, rotting death to something far more savage. For a brief, chaotic season, The Bloody Mummers ruled the greatest fortress in Westeros, and in doing so, they proved once and for all that Harrenhal does not simply punish ambition. It devours anyone who dares to sit in its halls without the nobility to command them. Vargo Hoat was their leader, a man from the distant city of Qoherys, where they worship a black goat and forge steel with dark secrets. He spoke with a lisp that made his threats sound almost comical. There was nothing funny about the way he kept his company in line. The brave companions had no loyalty to any house. They fought for Tywin Lannister during the War of the Five Kings, but only because he paid them. When the opportunity came to betray him, they did so without hesitation, seizing Harrenhal for themselves and turning it into a den of cruelty. The castle's massive walls, built to withstand dragons, now echoed with the screams of prisoners. The garrison that remained was a mix of broken men and sadists. Vargo Hoat believed he had finally found a seat worthy of his reputation, but Harrenhal had other plans. The castle began to consume him from the moment he took command. It started small, nervous twitches, paranoid glances at the shadows that flickered in the melted stone corridors. Then the rumour spread among his own men. They said Vargo was losing his mind. He spoke to empty rooms, that he ordered executions for crimes that no one had committed. The horrific fate of Vargo Hoat is not a story of a single dramatic event. It is a slow, grinding descent into madness, a process where the castle itself seemed to peel away his sanity layer by layer. The curse of Harrenhal does not always strike with fire or steel. Sometimes it sits inside a man's head, whispering until he tears himself apart. Vargo Hoat's final humiliation came not from a ghost, but from the very men he had mocked. When the Lannister returned to reclaim Harrenhal, they found a shattered commander. Lord Tywin's forces captured Vargo and took him to the castle's dungeons. There, in the same damp cells where he had tortured prisoners, they subjected him to the same mutilations he had inflicted on others. They cut off his hands and feet, then his tongue, leaving him a stump of a man in the darkness. But the castle was not finished. As he lay bleeding, waiting for death, the stones themselves seemed to press down on him. The story goes that he lingered for days, his mind finally dissolving into the blackness that had always haunted those walls. Harrenhal had punished him not for his cruelty, but for his lack of worth. He had no noble blood, no ancient claim, no right to sit in the seat of kings. The castle, built from the sweat and blood of slaves, only respects those who can command it with true authority. Vargo Hoat was a pretender, and pretenders are always devoured first. The brief rule of the brave companions ended as suddenly as it began. Their chaos left the castle scarred, the walls stained with fresh blood, the courtyards littered with the bones of their victims. But Harrenhal did not mourn their departure. It simply waited for the next lord to stumble into its embrace. And the next lord would not be a sellsword. He would be a man of honour, a man who thought he could tame the curse with kindness. That story too would end in fire. The wheel of death never stops turning at Harrenhal. Each new occupant thinks they are different, that they can break the pattern. But the pattern is older than any house, older than the Targaryens, older than the dragons. It is etched into the very foundation of the castle, a promise written in slag and ash. And as one chapter closes, another opens. A chapter we will call the Revolving Door of Death, where the castle cycles through rulers faster than a heartbeat, each one clutching the title of Lord of Harrenhal for a moment before the curse takes them. The chaos of the brave companions left Harrenhal in ruins, both physically and morally. Vargo Hoat's severed hands and his drooling, mad end were just the latest offering to the castle's insatiable appetite. But the curse does not stop with one man. It cycles through lords and captains like a fever, and by the time the Lannisters took back control, the castle had already begun its next meal. Consider Amory Lorch, a knight of House Lorch. He was appointed Castellan of Harrenhal by Tywin Lannister after the departure of the brave companions. Lorch was a brutal man, the same one who had murdered Rhaenys Targaryen during the sack of King's Landing. But Harrenhal has no memory of loyalty. It does not reward its keepers, it devours them. Within months, Lorch was dead, killed by Vargo Hoat's men during a skirmish in the Riverlands. A quick, inglorious end, as if the castle had simply shrugged him off like a stray dog. Then there is Janos Slynt, a former commander of the City Watch, a man who rose through bribery and betrayal, was gifted the lordship of Harrenhal by Tywin as a reward for his part in the arrest of Ned Stark. Slynt never even reached the castle. He was sent to the Night's Watch instead, stripped of his title before he could claim it. But even that was not enough. The curse followed him north, where he later met his death at the hands of Jon Snow. The title of Lord of Harrenhal, even unclaimed, was a brand that marked him for doom, and there are others. Every Lannister officer who held the castle for more than a few months died in some war or another. The Mountain's men, the sellswords, the raiders, they all passed through those blackened walls, and none left unscathed. The castle, it seems, does not merely kill its lords. It poisons anyone who dares to call it home. This brings us to the most ironic appointment of all. Petyr Baelish, better known as Littlefinger, was named Lord of Harrenhal by King Joffrey in the wake of the War of the Five Kings. It was a title meant to elevate a low-born man into the high aristocracy. Littlefinger accepted it with a smile, but he never, ever set foot inside the castle. He knew better. The castle is a death sentence, a bauble wrapped in ash and blood. He used the title to secure alliances, to marry Lysa Arryn, to climb higher, but he always kept his distance. He understood what many before him did not. Harrenhal is not a home. It is a trophy that drags you down. And that is the true nature of this place. The lordship of Harrenhal became a reward that no one actually wants to possess. It is a title-only affair, a name on a scroll that you never hang on your wall. You take it for the political value, but you never sleep in its halls. You find a castellan to hold it, and you wait for him to die, as he inevitably will. The cycle is so predictable that it becomes almost mythic. A house is granted the castle. They rise, they burn. The castle is passed on. It is a machine of ambition and death, designed by Harren the Black to be the greatest stronghold, and cursed by his arrogance to be the greatest tomb. So what happens when the story moves beyond these human pawns? When the castle itself begins to speak? When its ghosts, its prophecies, its whispered warnings start to shape the fate of an entire kingdom? That is where the truth of the curse begins to reveal itself, not in fire and steel, but in something far older and far more dangerous, the supernatural evidence. Littlefinger never set foot in Harrenhal. He accepted the title, the lands, the revenue, but he stayed far away, as though the castle itself were a bear trap baited with gold. That decision, that calculated refusal to walk through its gates, tells you more about the curse than 100 ghost stories ever could, because Littlefinger believed in nothing he could not manipulate. Yet he chose to treat Harrenhal as though it were poison, and perhaps he was right. The question that claws at anyone who studies this place is whether the curse is real, whether there is actual magic lingering in the melted stone and the blood-soaked earth, or whether the castle simply breaks people's minds with its sheer weight of history. To answer that, we have to look at the evidence, not the patterns of death we have already charted, but the tangible, sensory reports that have followed every occupant for 300 years. Sailors on the God's Eye speak of nights when the castle glows with a faint orange light, as though Balerion's fire still smoulders deep in the foundations. Fishermen hear voices carried across the water, whispers that sound like Harren the Black pleading for mercy in a language half forgotten. Inside the walls, the stories are even more consistent. Every guard who has spent a night on watch in the King's Pie Tower reports a sudden, bone-deep cold that settles in the chest, a chill that no fire can chase away. They call them cold spots, but that term is far too mild. It is as if the air itself remembers the heat of dragonfire and flips to the opposite extreme, leeching warmth from the living in a desperate, silent scream. Then there are the screaming stones. This is not a metaphor. Multiple occupants, from the Harroways to the Strongs to the brave companions, have testified that certain walls in Harrenhal emit a high, keening noise when the wind blows from the north. The sound is not constant. It comes at odd hours, sometimes in dead calm, and it rises and falls like a living thing in pain. Maesters who have studied the acoustics say it is the unique curvature of the melted towers, the way the slagged stone funnels air, but that explanation never satisfies the men who have heard it. They say the stones are screaming because they remember the night they were cooked alive, and that the sound is Harren's last curse echoing through the centuries. But the most unsettling evidence connects Harrenhal directly to the old gods, the ancient powers that predate the Seven and even the first men. When Harren the Black built this fortress, he did not just quarry stone from the nearby hills. He used weirwood trees, sacred trees with faces carved into them, the eyes of the old gods that see everything. The heart tree in Harrenhal's godswood is one of the largest in the Riverlands, its trunk pale as bone, its leaves red as blood, and those leaves are said to weep a crimson sap that stains the ground beneath, especially after a death within the walls. The servants whisper that the tree's face changes expression depending on who stands before it. Some claim the carved mouth moves, that it speaks the names of the doomed in a voice like dry bark cracking. The connection between the weirwood and the curse runs deeper than superstition. The old gods are bound to the land, to the trees that were planted in sacred groves. When Harren ordered the felling of weirwoods to build his castle, he was violating a pact as old as the first men. He took the wood of the gods and nailed it into his walls. And perhaps that is why the stones remember, why the cold spots coalesce near the wooden beams and the carved doors. The old gods do not forget. They watch through every grain of weirwood, and they have seen every murder, every betrayal, every fire that has consumed house after house. So is the curse magic, or is it a psychological manifestation of guilt and fear? The truth may be both. There is a reason that every lord who takes Harrenhal starts to see shadows in the corners, starts to hear footsteps in empty corridors, starts to wake in the middle of the night with the certain knowledge that something is standing at the foot of the bed. The castle does not need spells to destroy its occupants. It only needs to remind them of what they have done to claim it, and what they will do to keep it. The guilt festers, and the fear breeds paranoia, and the paranoia leads to fire and blood. The pattern is so consistent that it almost feels designed. But then you have the stories that go beyond psychology, the cold that does not obey thermodynamics, the screams that come from solid stone, the weirwood that bleeds before a death. Those cannot be explained away as mere suggestion. Something ancient lives in Harrenhal, something that was awakened by the blood mixed into the mortar and the dragonfire that sealed it. Perhaps it is the old gods, angry at the violation of their trees. Perhaps it is the ghost of Harren himself, trapped in the molten rock of his own arrogance. Or perhaps it is something older than both, something that dwelt on the shores of the God's Eye long before the first men came, something that feeds on ambition and leaves only ash behind. To understand why this particular patch of land holds such power, you have to look at the geography itself. The lake called the God's Eye is not just a body of water. It is a sacred basin, a place where the boundary between the mortal world and the world of spirit is thin. The Isle of Faces lies at its centre, and the groves of weirwood there are the oldest in all Westeros. Harrenhal was built on the northern shore of that lake, and its foundations reach down into the same soil that nurtures those ancient roots. The castle is not separate from the God's Eye. It is an extension of it, a stone claw reaching out from a place where the old gods still hold court. And that, more than any single ghost story, may be the key to the curse. The next time you look at a map of the Riverlands, trace the shoreline of the God's Eye, follow it north until you see the blackened towers of Harrenhal, and then ask yourself why, of all the castles in Westeros, this one alone sits so close to the heart of the old religion. The answer lies in the water, in the shape of the lake, in the currents that seem to circle the castle like a noose tightening. It is a geography of doom, and in the next part of our journey, we will explore exactly how the land and the lake and the trees conspire to make Harrenhal what it is. The story of the God's Eye is the story of the curse itself, and it is a story that has not finished being told. But if the ghosts of Harrenhal are real, and we've seen plenty of evidence suggesting they are, then we have to ask where that haunting energy comes from. The castle didn't rise from barren ground. It was built on the northern shore of the God's Eye, the largest lake in all of Westeros. And that lake is no ordinary body of water. The God's Eye is deep, dark and ancient, and at its centre sits the Isle of Faces, a place so shrouded in mystery that even the maesters admit they know very little about it. And that's where the geography of Harrenhal becomes something far more than a simple setting. It becomes the foundation of the curse itself. The God's Eye is roughly 30 leagues across, a vast inland sea that seems to hold something primordial beneath its surface. The water is cold even in summer, and fishermen who venture too close to the island speak of an unnatural stillness, as if the lake itself is holding its breath. The Isle of Faces is the only landmass in that entire expanse, and it is covered with weirwood trees, each one carved with a face. According to legend, the children of the forest carved those faces during the Pact, the ancient truce that ended the long war between the first men and the children. That island was a sacred meeting ground, a place where the old gods themselves were said to walk among the leaves. Now consider what Harren the Black did. He built his monstrous fortress on the shore directly opposite that island, as if to stare it down, as if to claim dominion even over the ancient magic. And he used weirwood in the construction, not just as timber but as structural beams, door frames, and even the core of the Kingspire Tower. Some maesters argue that the weirwood was chosen for its strength and resistance to rot, but the stories say Harren mixed the blood of his slaves into the mortar, and that blood was spilled on weirwood that had been cut from the sacred groves. In a sense, he was building a monument to his own arrogance on top of a living, breathing wound in the natural order. The result is a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the old gods is thin, frayed, and bleeding. The mystical properties of the lake amplify that effect. The God's Eye has no visible outlet. The water seeps through underground channels into the Trident, but the surface appears almost motionless, a dark mirror that reflects the sky, but never the truth. It is said that on moonless nights, the lake glows faintly, as if the souls of the dead are trapped just beneath the ripples, and the Isle of Faces, with its 1,000 carved eyes, watches over it all, silent and patient. That leads us to the theories that the Green Men, or the Children of the Forest, actually cursed the site. The Green Men are the mysterious guardians of the Isle of Faces, a brotherhood of druids who never leave the island, and who are sworn to protect the ancient pact. They are rarely seen, and when they are described as cloaked figures with antlers or green-dyed skin. Some believe they still perform rituals to keep the old magic alive, and if that's true, then Harrenhal's proximity to that sacred ground could have triggered a backlash. The idea is that the children of the forest, though long gone from the mainland, left behind a residual ward around the God's Eye. Any structure built in defiance of that ward, especially one built with blood and weirwood, would become a vessel for that protective curse. Think about it. Every house that has held Harrenhal has not just died out, but has died in a way that echoes the original sin. Fire consumed Harren the Black and his entire line. The Harroways, the Towers, the Qoherys, each met a fiery end or a swift, inexplicable collapse. The Strongs were burned alive in their own bedchambers. The curse seems to target those who try to claim the castle as their own, as if the island's magic is saying, "You do not belong here. This place was never meant for men." And that proximity to ancient magic fuels the castle's dark reputation in a very tangible way. The castle's stones are said to scream during storms, not from wind, but from something trapped inside the mortar. The weirwood beams weep red sap that looks like blood, even centuries after construction, and the air inside the Great Hall carries a chill that no hearth can warm, as if the cold comes from the lake itself, seeping up through the foundations. So the geography of the God's Eye is not just a backdrop, it is the source code of the curse. Harrenhal sits at the edge of a place that holds the memory of the old gods, and the castle was built as an act of violation. The lake remembers, the island remembers, and the stones of Harrenhal are still paying the price. Which brings us to a deeper truth. Harrenhal is not just a cursed castle, it is a narrative mirror, reflecting the ambitions of everyone who dares to sit in its shadow. In the next chapter, we'll look at how that mirror works, and why the castle reveals the true nature of every lord or lady who tries to call it their own. Because at the heart of the curse is not just magic or ghosts, but a story repeating itself over and over again, waiting for someone to finally learn the lesson that Harren never did. The God's Eye is a lake of secrets, and the Isle of Faces at its heart is a place where the old gods still whisper through the weirwood trees. Some say the children of the forest placed a curse on the land long before Harrenhal ever rose from the shore, a curse that punished any who dared to build a monument to human arrogance on sacred ground. But if the lake and the island are the source of the curse, then Harrenhal itself is the manifestation of that punishment made visible. And that is where the castle becomes something far more than a haunted ruin. Harrenhal is a narrative mirror, reflecting the state of the realm in every era it survives. Think about the way the castle appears in House of the Dragon. The Great Council of 101 was held within its blackened walls, a moment when the Targaryen dynasty tried to choose a path forward by votes and compromise. Yet the castle that hosted the council was already a monument to failure. Harren the Black had built it to last forever, and within a day, Balerion the Black Dread turned those towers into slag. The kingdom that gathered there was attempting to avoid dragonfire, to choose a king by law rather than by conquest. But the castle itself was a reminder that even the greatest power can be unmade by a single flame. As the Targaryens slid toward civil war, Harrenhal became a stage for the ambitions that would tear them apart. House Strong held the castle during the Dance of the Dragons, and their fate mirrored the fate of the ruling family. A father and son burned alive by fire set by their own kin, just as the Targaryens would burn each other in the years to come. The castle did not just house the conflict, it embodied it. Now turned to Game of Thrones, set centuries later, the kingdom has been unified again, more or less. But the cracks are showing. The War of the Five Kings erupts, and Harrenhal becomes a revolving door for warlords and mercenaries. Tywin Lannister holds it briefly, and his grip on the realm is ruthless but temporary. The brave companions turn it into a chamber of horrors, and the castle swallows them whole. Arya Stark walks its halls and sees the faces of those who will die, and the castle seems to conspire in her list of vengeance. Every lord who claims Harrenhal in that era dies or loses everything. The castle refuses to be owned, and that is the reflection. A realm that has forgotten the lessons of the past, that believes power can be seized and held by force, is a realm doomed to repeat the same collapse. Harrenhal stands as a permanent warning, and in both eras, the realm fails to heed it. Now consider the two thrones. The Iron Throne in King's Landing is forged from the swords of Aegon's conquered enemies, a deliberate symbol of unity through submission. It is hard, jagged, and uncomfortable, meant to remind every ruler that power is a burden. But Harrenhal itself is a different kind of throne. The 5 towers that Balerion melted into twisted, blackened fingers of stone are not a throne you sit upon. They are a throne you are trapped inside. The melted throne, if you will, is the castle as a whole, a seat of power that was built to be unassailable and then proved utterly vulnerable to dragonfire, where the Iron Throne represents the strength of a dynasty that harnessed dragons. The melted throne represents the hubris of a dynasty that challenged dragons and was erased. In both series, the castle is a silent accusation against anyone who thinks they can build something permanent. The Iron Throne endures, but only because it was born from the same fire that destroyed Harrenhal. The The castle is the cautionary tale that the Iron Throne refuses to tell. Why does Harrenhal remain a ruin even when the rest of Westeros prospers? Because it cannot be rebuilt. Not just because the stone is still warped and cracked from the heat, but because the curse ensures that no one will ever truly thrive within its walls. In times of peace, the great lords of the realm look at Harrenhal and remember what happened to every house that tried to claim it. They build their own keeps elsewhere, many of them far smaller but far safer. The castle sits empty, a permanent scar on the landscape, because the realm has learned, at least in part, that some ambitions are too dangerous to touch. The ruin is a symbol of collective memory, a physical reminder that power gained through cruelty and arrogance will eventually turn to ash. The rest of Westeros builds and prospers, but Harrenhal remains exactly as it was on the day Valerian flew away, a monument to the cost of overreach. And yet the castle never stops reflecting. Every time a new claimant tries to raise the banners of Harrenhal, the realm watches to see if the curse will strike again. In House of the Dragon, Larys Strong burns his own father and brother, and then blames the castle, using the curse as a mask for his own treachery. The realm believes it, because they want to believe it. They need Harrenhal to be cursed, so that they can explain why such a fortress cannot be tamed. In Game of Thrones, Littlefinger receives the title Lord of Harrenhal and never steps foot inside. He knows better. The curse is a convenient fiction for some, but for others, it is a moral truth. The castle mirrors the corruption of the realm because the realm projects its own fears onto those blackened stones. This is why the curse persists, and why we are about to gather all the evidence and decide once and for all whether it is simply a story or something far more real. In the next chapter, we will examine the final verdict. Why the curse is real, not as a ghost story, but as a truth that the history of Westeros has proven again and again. The castle that destroyed every house has one last lesson to teach, and it is a lesson about the nature of power itself. So there it stands, a castle that is not just a place but a mirror, reflecting the ambition, the cruelty, and the inevitable collapse of every soul who tries to claim it. We have seen how it mirrors the realm, how the melted throne of Harrenhal echoes the Iron Throne in its blood-soaked foundation. But if Harrenhal is a mirror, then the curse is a verdict, and it is time to deliver that verdict. Let us walk through the roster of the dead, house by house, from the very first stone to the last lord who dared to call himself its master. The curse did not begin with a whimper. It began with a roar and tower melting into slag. House Hoare was the first to fall. Harren the Black built his monument over 40 years, using the forced labour of thousands of rivermen, mixing blood into the mortar as if to bind the stones with suffering. On the very day he declared Harrenhal impenetrable, Aegon the Conqueror landed, and Balerion the Black Dread turned those towers into molten tears. Harren and all his sons burned alive in Kingspire Tower. The house that built the castle was extinguished in a single night. Then came House Harroway. Aegon granted them the castle as a reward for loyalty, but within a few years the Harroways were gone, wiped out by plague, by war, by something that seemed to whisper from the blackened walls. Next was House Towers, a minor house that held the castle for a blink of history before they too vanished, leaving only a name in a ledger. Then House Qoherys, a family that had served the Targaryens faithfully. They lasted perhaps a generation before their line ended in fire and blood. The pattern was already clear. Every house that took Harrenhal was doomed to extinction. It was as if the castle itself fed on their ambition, growing stronger as they withered. Then came House Strong. In the era of House of the Dragon, Lord Lyonel Strong was Hand of the King, a wise and capable man. His sons, Harwin the Strong Knight and Larys, the cripple who walked in shadows, they held Harrenhal during the Great Council of 101, where Viserys I was chosen king. But the curse had not forgotten them. Lyonel and Harwin died in a fire at Harrenhal, a fire that Larys himself set, using the curse as a convenient lie to cover his betrayal. House Strong crumbled from within, and by the end of the Dance of the Dragons, only Larys remained. A lord without a legacy, a master of whispers, who would eventually meet his own end in the chaos of the war. And after the Strongs, House Lothston rose and fell, with Mad Danelle Lothston adding tales of cannibalism and dark magic to the castle's legend. Finally, House Whent held the castle during the time of Game of Thrones, but they too were swept away by the War of the Five Kings, their lines scattered and broken. Every single house that has ever ruled Harrenhal is extinct. Not one has survived. The castle does not just kill its lords. It erases their bloodlines, their names, their very memory. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern written in fire and stone. And this brings us to the philosophical heart of the matter. Harrenhal is not merely a cursed location. It is the physical embodiment of the Game of Thrones itself. The game is a struggle for power that promises glory, but delivers only ruin. It seduces the ambitious with visions of thrones and crowns, then consumes them in the very fire they sought to control. Harrenhal is that promise made manifest. Its towers rise like the ambitions of every lord who ever dreamed of sitting on the Iron Throne. Its walls are built from the blood of the small folk, just as the realm is built on the backs of the common people. And its curse is the inevitable price of overreaching ambition. Think about it. The Game of Thrones is a cycle of rise and fall, of houses that climb to power only to be destroyed by their own greed or by the next house climbing over their bones. Harrenhal is that cycle made permanent. It is a place where the game is played in miniature, but with the same outcome every time. The castle punishes those who try to own it, because in the world of Westeros, no one truly owns power. They only borrow it, and the interest is always paid in blood. So what is the final verdict? The curse is real, not because a ghost haunts the corridors, but because the castle is a narrative trap. It is a story that repeats itself, a lesson that the realm refuses to learn. Every time a new lord takes Harrenhal, they believe they will be different. They will be clever enough, strong enough, lucky enough to break the cycle. And every time the castle proves them wrong. The curse is not supernatural in the way of a vengeful spirit. It is supernatural in the way of a law of nature. It is gravity for ambition. You reach too high, you fall. And so for the realm to find peace, Harrenhal must remain empty. It must sit as a ruin on the shore of the God's Eye. A monument to the futility of the game. No one should claim it, because claiming it is an act of pride that invites destruction. The castle is a warning. It is a scar on the landscape of Westeros, a reminder that power, when sought for its own sake, turns to ash. The best ruler is the one who looks at Harrenhal and walks away. The best king is the one who understands that some thrones are not meant to be sat upon. As the sun sets over the blackened towers, and the stones seem to whisper with the voices of 1,000 dead ambitions, we leave Harrenhal where it belongs. Alone, silent and eternal, the curse will never be broken, because it was never meant to be. It is the final word on the Game of Thrones, a verdict that echoes through the ages. You cannot win, you can only survive, and the only way to survive is to let the castle stand empty, a tomb for the dreams of those who thought they could own the world. Thank you for walking through this cursed history with me. If you have ever felt the pull of ambition, the desire to build something that defies the heavens, remember Harrenhal. Remember that the greatest fortress ever built is also the greatest grave, and perhaps in that memory you will find a different kind of peace, the peace of letting go. Good night, and may your own tower stand only as high as your heart can bear. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.